as I know, Mike is supposed to join us. I didn't hear otherwise.
Yeah.
We'll get started. Everybody ready? Okay. You ready?
Yes, sir.
As soon as you're ready, Sam.
Yeah.
Okay, I will call the October 2nd, 2017 Select Board meeting to order and invite you to rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, and if you would please remain standing for a moment of silence after the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So if you remain standing for me, you would please join me in a moment of silence for the tragedy that unfolded last night in Las Vegas. Our sympathies go out to the many victims, their families and friends, and we commend the heroic actions and courage of the first responders. Thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's Select Board meeting and remind you to sign in if you haven't already. I think many of you did, so thank you. And if you could put your cell phones on silence or buzz, that would be greatly appreciated so it doesn't disrupt the meeting. Next item is agenda additions and changes. And Greg, what do we have tonight?
We have a few items from Select Board member Irene Renner. For item 5I, that's the adoption or acceptance of the Select Board computer use policy. There's an article entitled, "Why the Smart Reading Device of the Future May Be ... paper. Study finds difference in recollection from screen reading versus paper reading. And the reading brain in the digital age, the science of paper versus screens."
Okay.
We also...
Or please, is on the reverse.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's a Dartmouth.
Press release from Dartmouth College, digital media may be changing how you think. Proud to announce that our town assessor, Randy Viennes, has been awarded the Sherry Vermilia Award in recognition of outstanding service to the assessment profession. That was from the Northeast Regional Association of Assessing Officers Incorporated.
That's a wonderful recognition for Randy in the town.
That'd be for consent agenda.
Okay.
Also for consent agenda, you talked about this at the last meeting, but there's a memo from Max Levy and George Tyler about the City of South Burlington Airport resolution, and the resolution is attached. That'd be for consent. I know it came on kind of quickly, but going for consent today, or could postpone it until the 16th if that's the board's desire. And also have another consent agenda item. It's a warranty deed, and this is it's been signed by Pat Scheidel and Allenbrook Development Incorporated. This is transferring land over in the Saxon Hill area over to the town. So just an FYI for consent.
Okay. This could also be put...
Could also be put on the 16th.
On the
if that's
16th.
the board's preference.
Okay.
And lastly, you saw this via email, Select Board update about ETC Next, so you do have that, but hard copies at your chairs.
Okay. And then we also have some minutes stuff, right? From Irene? Okay, so what's the board's pleasure? Adding these items to the meeting notice. Irene's for 5I, I think it was, and the rest for consent.
So moved.
Yeah, okay, all right. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, so thank you, Mike. And Sue, any further discussion? Irene.
I'd like to put off the airport discussion until the next meeting if possible, so that we can research it and think about it.
Sure. Mike and Sue made a motion to include it. Do you
It
want...
could still be,
Yeah?
it could still be on this agenda as a consent item. We have done that in the past.
Okay,
and
just
then
put it on the agenda.
Put it on as an action item for the 16th, in which case
Yep.
everybody has a chance to look at it for the 2-week interim period.
Okay.
Fine with that.
Sound good? Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the additions to the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion passes 5-0. Thank you all. Next item is is for public to be heard. That's a time for the public to speak to the select board on any topic that's not on the agenda. Is there anyone here tonight wishing to speak during public to be heard? And I see Will Dodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm Will Dodge. I'm the acting chair right now of the Essex Energy Committee, and I'm delighted that you guys are going to hopefully approve Natalie and David to join tonight. But before we do that, one of the pressing items that I think we have is a request, or I should say through a collaboration with Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, or actually Efficiency Vermont, to join up with the Button Up campaign, which is basically kind of a 3-month effort to basically try to spread as broadly as possible information about energy efficiency measures, whether it be renewable energy projects, weatherization, electric vehicles, and including giving out as many free LED light bulbs as we can. And in exchange, what they ask for under the memorandum of agreement is for us to try to get people to sign up with Efficiency Vermont and collect their information, basically name and addresses, to give to Efficiency Vermont. So there's sort of there are legal obligations in the document. Frankly, as not acting as the town's lawyer, but reviewing it, I think it's of questionable enforceability. But I didn't want to go out in front of that and sign on behalf of the town without checking either with the town manager first or with the select board. So I thought I would bring it up, and I think it goes a little bit more broadly to what types of things are we okay to maybe consult with the town manager or consult with the select board before we press ahead. We're making real progress because we now have a committee that will soon have a quorum, and we've got good agenda items, but we also don't want to get out ahead of our skis.
Okay, and how, is it time sensitive?
It is, because Efficiency Vermont will only allow a certain number of communities or organizations to join, and they've been pushing up for us to join. And I sort of see it as a first effort for us to sort of galvanize our resources and our attention, try to get a Facebook page up, start using the Vermont, the energy tracker, which allows us to get collect a lot of information about what people are doing effectively, and also helping promote either businesses in Essex or businesses who operate in Essex to try to improve efficiency, sell vehicles, that type of thing.
So our next meeting is on the 14th. Is that too late?
That might be a little too late. That's why I decided to come down after speaking with the committee members about it.
Right. What do you think? Or Mike?
Generally, I don't think we take action in a meeting where something's brought up for the first time like this.
No, I mean, we could get a sense of the board, but we couldn't take action on it. Or we ask them to come back on the 14th and hope it's not too late.
Well, I guess at a minimum, I would suggest that Pat take a look at it, or somebody, have the lawyers look at it. If there's legal ramifications in there. I don't know. I guess that's maybe getting ahead of. That's maybe saying, yeah, we want to do it. So I don't. Yeah.
Matt, you have a suggestion?
Well, the sense of the board could at least kick it forward a little bit. Excuse me if I may ask another question. What's the drop dead date?
They claim that it's already passed. My barometer tells me that we probably need to try to get back to them in the next couple of days.
So could we get a page holder and explain to them our situation and say that, generally speaking, we have been proactive in energy matters, not only in the town, but also in the village of Essex Junction. We have a very active energy committee, and our history would suggest that once the board has had a chance to delve into it and get the full measure, there's a good chance that they would be sympathetic. So if we could do that, that would give us some time. We wouldn't be in violation of our protocols, and I think everybody should be somewhat content with that. Yes?
We've done button up before here. It's
We
not
have.
a new thing,
Yeah.
So the fact that we're sort of retreads, I think, is also in our favor.
Yes.
Sue?
That's what I was gonna ask, is what they want, the MOA that they want you to sign, is that for button-up day, or is it for
Yes.
something else?
For the button-up campaign, as they call it.
And that's what's driving the sense of urgency, because that's like
what's
in,
driving it. In other words, they don't want to put us out as a participating community without us signing, nor do we want to be a participating community without knowing whether we should indeed go ahead and sign. But to your point, I'm happy to give that a try and see if we could kind of get maybe give them a tentative yes until the 14th.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would give the board some comfort.
And the sense of the board is to go forward.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, it's the 16th, not the 14th.
16.
16, yeah, thank you. It's okay. More, sorry, Bob.
Nope, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
Thank
I'll
you.
do my best.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else like to speak during public to be heard? Yes. Mitch, if you can, just for the record, state your name, please.
Mitch Stern, Essex Junction, or Essex Town. 6 months ago, I came to this board with a problem I've been having with a neighbor who runs a boarding house next door to me. The tenants are still there, and they smoke every 15 minutes. There's 3 of them, and this smoke is coming into my house. That has not been resolved. This is still a problem. I'm told that he has asked these people to leave. They will not leave. Meanwhile, the smoke's coming in. And not only is it smoke, but they're doing this in all hours of the day and night, from the morning until 3 in the morning. While they're doing it, they're throwing garbage on the ground. The garbage keeps coming onto my property, whether it be cigarette butts, candy wrappers, stuff like that. So there's a health issue involved in this. They're using their phones and making noise at all hours of the day and night. And it's just pretty disgusting. I shouldn't have to deal with this. I am asking this board to give me some relief in this in the form of an ordinance that requires 150-foot spacing from my premises to wherever they're going to smoke. If they want to smoke in the house, their house, fine, I don't have a problem with that. But if they're going to smoke outside, I want that space so I don't have to deal with the smoke, the noise, and the dirt.
So, an ordinance that says nobody can smoke within 150 feet of outside their home?
150 feet of another building that they don't own. And that's reasonable. Like, if you want to smoke, smoke inside your house. Do not smoke outside, because you cannot control that smoke. That smoke comes in my garage, comes in my house. Who's protecting my health? And we've had this discussion before. These people choose not to be cooperative. They've been asked to go to the other side of the property. They do not do this. Okay? So we have tried this. It doesn't work. We need to step this up to something different.
So again, even on private property, telling people they can't smoke within 150 feet of their property?
Well, we have ordinances that says people can't burn fires on their property unless certain conditions are met. When you're smoking, that's like burning a fire. It produces smoke. It produces unhealthy effects that affect other people. And because this is done a lot,
Yeah.
we're not talking about that once in a while they go out. Every 15 to 20 minutes, there's at least 3 different people doing this, and then there are other activities going along with this that are disturbing. And it is not working. Okay, I would love for it to work. It has not worked. We need to step it up to something else. The landlord tells me that his lease says there is to be no smoking on the premises whatsoever, and they do what they please. So we both have problems with this.
Pat, can I call on Sharon here?
Well-
I think she's dealt with it, or what?
Let me just, before you call on
Yeah.
Sharon, and yes, you can, but we did look at this before. Mitch and I have had conversation. Sharon Kelly, our zoning officer, has had a conversation in the past about this, and I asked Sharon to try to track down some sample ordinances that would cover this matter, and unfortunately, we might be trendsetters in this, at least in Vermont. It's not to say that we couldn't try. I'm just saying that we're going to be on this far end of the thin limb. Mitch has been pretty patient with the situation. When we first spoke, he was quite concerned, and you know, I don't know if you have allergies or anything, but you know, we've heard in the past we couldn't burn houses because neighbors had allergies, and depending upon how the wind blew, you would have an adverse impact on people. So we've we've had this issue come before us before on the burning of the house. It was easy, we just simply didn't do it. But if the landlord has a restriction in the lease and the lease is being violated, I think maybe our zoning officer ought to contact the landlord possibly and say, help, we have a citizen concern. But that's as far as I know. If you're interested in us doing more work on that, we certainly will. But Sharon, do you want to
Looks
weigh
like
in?
Sharon's,
So there are issues at this house. Since that meeting of 6 months ago, I have and met on the property for other considerations between the disputes between the landowner and the tenants. So there's definitely stuff going on there between the two. I did personally speak with them and ask them what the situation was, and they said that they did smoke outside. They are not permitted to smoke in the house. They go to the other side or they go on their back deck. It's tough, excuse me, it's tough to say when the wind's blowing where you are. That's
The prevailing winds are out of the northwest, which is blowing right towards my door.
So, as far as the other issues with trash, I've been over there, I'd probably say 5 or 6 times since we've met here for health issues, and they've been corrected. Everything, you know, the landlord's trying to remedy, but there's definitely friction between the landlord and the tenants, and I don't know the status of what their occupancy will be. I think he's doing his best to try to get that fixed. And that's the best I can tell you there. I did call around to other communities. Nobody had an ordinance that says they can't smoke on their property. Winooski did create something where they had a special area on commercial, a commercial area, I think is my memory, but I would have to refresh myself on those notes. But
this is not commercial area we're talking.
no, we're talking residential. I'm talking about in Winooski.
Yeah.
They had something that they
Right.
developed for commercial type stuff, but no other communities, surrounding communities, had an ordinance that says you can't smoke on your property.
There's BLTC.
I'd have to refresh myself with the notes, looking into that, but I think Pat's on something when it says we would be the trend setters if you wanted to go that route. And I would obviously encourage a legal opinion on that as well.
Well, it would be good to see what other angles maybe that could be done to help Mitch in this situation, because it sounds like a not a very pleasant situation. Yeah, Mitch?
I did research just a little bit and found that there have been problems between smokers and non-smokers across property lines. Usually it involves renters, but sometimes it involves homeowners. And in general, I mean, there's no real clear-cut way to follow this, but in general, when courts have to decide, they generally decide in favor of the non-smoker. That's what was clearly indicated in some of the things I've looked up. The other piece of this is, even with these tenants, who we don't know if he's ever going to get these people out or what the story is, he tells me that they're not supposed to be smoking there at all. He allows them to smoke outside, but they basically don't listen to him at all anymore. He did tell them to smoke in a certain spot, and they basically go wherever they please. Sit in the driveways, and their driveway's 20 feet from my house. So that kind of things. As far as the dirt and the garbage, it's a problem of candy wrappers. Every day, candy wrappers blowing over there. The landlord said he had a problem with a hole in the garbage can. But why is this hole only allowing candy wrappers to get out? These are the obvious questions that I ask. I can also tell you that in this past winter, I basically caught about 6 or 7 different mice in the house. In the last 35 years, I've never caught that many over the 35 years. So does this have something to do with them? Well, I don't know. Usually it does. That's the kind of thing. So now the other question is, are we making a enforceable ordinance? Well, who's going to fight it? Are they going to take it to court?
Which ordinance are you referring to?
I mean, if we put this ordinance through,
Yeah.
and why shouldn't we be trendsetters? Why must we be the followers? We have a problem. This is the way we're going to fix it. maybe this is something that other municipalities may want to consider, is that don't people have the right to get clean air in their own homes?
So, Pat, can we see what options are out there?
Sure.
And maybe we can have a discussion at the board level and see what those options are and which ones we might be able to pursue that could help.
The trendsetter comment was the manager and me speaking. Usually if you're first, it hasn't been tested by the courts, and so therefore you would be the first one to test it and spend quite a bit of legal money. But again, that's the manager inside of me, and I don't live in your house, Mick, so.
But Donna, as I'm looking at this, who's going to fight this? These people aren't, so if it takes 3 or 4 years for this ordinance to be tested, it's had the desired effect. That's the way I see it too.
So we'll
We
look
could look into it and see what options might be out there.
Well, when I say we, really kind of referring to Sharon, do you have the
It's up to you.
the time and the resources
It's
and
up to you.
everything to delve into this at this point?
Well, I will certainly refresh myself with what's going on. It's my understanding from the landlord that he was in the middle of an eviction process, so it might solve itself that
Might be a
way.
self-solving thing. Can I also just, we have Andy go into the League of Cities and Towns annual meeting
No, that's a
Wednesday.
good point.
That would be a golden opportunity to do some face-to-face research if you could think of it. Okay.
Okay, good, all right,
Thank
so,
you.
see what we can do.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Anybody else for public to be heard? Greg?
I'm sorry, not public to be heard, but I completely neglected to mention during the agenda changes that I do not have the information I
Ah.
expected to for
Okay.
5K, that's the tax stabilization agreement, so that can come off the agenda. I'm sorry for missing that earlier.
Okay, so we should do a motion then to remove
Well, when you
that?
get to it, you
Or-
can table it
Yes,
to
just table it,
10/16.
Okay, that sounds better. Not 10:14.
No, but you could that too. I mean,
Okay, anybody
you want
else
People to join you.
for public to be heard? Okay, then we're going to move on to our first item of business, which is 5A, and we have luckily we have a couple of interviews. We have Natalie Braun and David Scopin for wanting to be appointed to the Essex Energy Committee. And our policy is if there's more than one person looking to interview for the same on the same board, we would ask one of you to please step into the foyer. And the way we do it, we'll say since Natalie's first on the agenda, we would ask her to stay. And David, if you wouldn't mind stepping into the foyer, and then we'll have Greg or somebody come out and get you shortly. Thank you. And Natalie, I'd like to invite you up here to this seat with the microphone, if you would. And first, thank you for wanting to volunteer in our community on the Essex Energy Committee.
My pleasure.
And if you could just give us a little bit of your background of who you are and what your interest is for being appointed to the Energy Committee.
Okay. So I'm speaking mainly, this is a big room to speak to. I'm speaking mainly to you all. Am I correct?
Well, I'd like everybody to hear.
Okay, I'll do that. Are you all hearing me pretty well? Okay. I'm sorry, just a light comment. Now I know where to come for lively conversation the first Monday of the month. This is, yes. Anyway.
First and third.
First and third?
Yeah.
Okay. I am a psychologist with the Burlington School District, and I have spent a lifetime being in love with this beautiful earth. And I grew up in a home where conservation and sustainable practices were part of the fabric of our life. So it's a way that I've lived for a very long time and am very passionate about. So I guess I came, given my much more advanced age, I came to this passion for not overusing, but trying to be as sustainable, renewable as possible through an entire lifetime. That blessing. And that's never left me. And given the state, the challenges, I think at least the science seems to be very clear around the additional challenges we're experiencing with climate change, etc. I realized well, I want to say David and I, David being my husband, realized when we moved to Vermont, which was 2 years ago, that we needed that just working on the micro level in our own home was insufficient. If we are in love with this place and this planet, and we have the time and the energy, then we need to be working at the systems level to promote sustainable a sustainable way of living, beginning starting at the community level and then the state level, etc. So I feel like I'm sitting up very tall here. Okay, yes, I usually do anyway. But anyway, so that is. I'm not sure. Was that the answer to your question? That's the how and the why of it. Yes, what brought me here.
Okay. And, yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add before I open up the questions?
No, only that as a psychologist, I'm accustomed to working on the micro and the macro level. And I've done that systems-wide and organizationally for my entire career. But I'm much newer to the understanding of how important that I can't, just David and me working on this at our house is wildly insufficient at this point. And so the Essex Energy Committee was the perfect opportunity to try to participate in positive things and provide some leadership in the community, and then advancing even to the state level for us to become the most renewable, vibrant leadership in this way of thinking.
Okay. Thank you, Natalie.
Sure.
Great. I'd like to open up to the board. Any questions for Natalie? Anybody has some? Irene?
I think I know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway. How many meetings have you attended of the Energy Committee thus far?
Oh, Irene.
Not exactly. Some people apply for committees they've never attended a meeting of, so I just wanted to bring that out.
I can't give you an exact number, but I say my last one was number 6 or so.
Right.
Yes. 6 or, yes, I'd say 6. And I didn't yes, I've been to 6.
So you're very active already.
Okay, yes, that is true.
Been for a long time.
Well,
Since you've been here.
longish, yeah. Would it help, maybe this question will come up, and I know you have many things on your agenda, but the piece I didn't say is that I'm a very active member of 350 Vermont, and I have a leadership position in the Burlington node, and have had a leadership position for many months now in terms of supporting their campaigns to promote alternatives in a very everything I was just talking about, a sustainable. So I have a great deal of reading that I've done as well in these areas. Yes, and am fairly knowledgeable about some of the legislative initiatives and some of the science behind things.
Wonderful. Thank you, Natalie.
Sure.
Any other questions from the board for Natalie? So needless to say, you know when the meetings are held, and you
I do.
obviously have time for them because you've been to many.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Have time and make time. And that's it's just that important.
Wonderful. Okay, if there's no further questions, the process is we will likely go into executive session later tonight and have a discussion and come out and make a decision, and somebody from the manager's office will give you a call tomorrow to let you know.
Excellent.
So, again, thank you so much for wanting to step forward and volunteer on the committee.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, okay. Hello, David, if you would like to join us at that table over there with the microphone. Thank you so much for wanting to volunteer and be appointed to the Energy Committee. If you could give us a little bit about your background and what your interest is on wanting to be appointed to the Energy Committee.
Background. How far back do you think we should go?
Whatever you're comfortable with.
I've worked all my life, but I'm retired. Worked at a variety of things. The reason I would want to be a member would be to assist my community in being an efficient user of energy in all its forms, and to do whatever I possibly could to advance the goals that the state has set for using more clean energy, etc. So that's, in a nutshell, that's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, David. So I'll open up questions to the board. Any questions for David? Irene?
You've been to a number of meetings, I believe?
Yes, I have. I've been to at least 2. My memory serves me well.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so you obviously know what day they meet?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah. And,
Okay.
yes, it is absolutely, and I have the time to do it, so I can definitely be a contributor and not simply someone who shows up on a regular basis. Well, she's a big motivator, and we can get together. We can get a lot done.
Okay, wonderful. Any other questions for David? Okay, so the process is we may go into executive session at the end of the meeting tonight, have a discussion, come out, make a decision, and from the manager's office will contact you tomorrow.
Very good.
So, thank you so much for wanting to step forward in our community and volunteer like this.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it, David.
Thank you.
And you're welcome to stay for the meeting, but you're certainly welcome to leave if you'd like.
Thank you.
Okay, so what's the board's pleasure? You want to go to executive session, or how would you like to do it?
Appoint them right now.
Okay, somebody want to make a motion? You do?
I
Okay.
make a motion that, I will make a motion that our select board appoint both Natalie Braun and David Scopin to the Essex Energy Committee.
Thank you, Sue. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Irene. Okay, any further discussion of appointing Natalie Braun and David Scopin to the Essex Energy Committee? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. They don't have to wait till the morning. So, great. Okay, we're going to move on then to the next item of business, which is Business 5B. It's an update on the Essex Town Center, the ETC Next Town Center Planning Project, and tonight we have Dana to kick that off, and she has some guests and a PowerPoint. Right? Okay. So, why don't you come up to the table there? It would be great to have you by the microphone. Make sure Scott gets you. And everybody see that? Okay. Is it possible to put it on the one back there too? Okay. So we're going to get the program or the slides on that monitor back there as well, so everybody can see what's going on. Okay, so Dana, you want to just introduce it and
Sure.
give us a rundown of what we're going to see?
Yeah, I'm happy to come before the select board tonight to give you an update on the ETC Next project. In the community development office, our true north is the town plan. So, the town plan, one of the priorities, was to update the 1991 town center master plan. So 25 years later, it had become a little bit stale and hadn't really stood the test of time given certain regional market forces and demand for housing and a number of things. What we want to do with the town center, because it's one of 3 areas designated for growth in the town. Susie Wilson Boulevard corridor, Susie Wilson corridor, the RPDI industrial area, and the town center. So what we wanted to do, our aim going into this, was to bring the town center alive and into the 21st century. So we hired the SE group out of Burlington, and Jason Hoover is one of our all-stars on the group. He's an Essex resident. And we've been pretty hard at work with the SC group since sometime in last winter. We formed a steering committee to act as a sounding board as this project went on. The steering committee has important stakeholders and residents. We wanted to get a broad representation, a diverse selection of people. And the steering committee has met about 4 times or so and has been guiding us through the project. The first thing we did with the SE group was to develop some base maps. We had a drone fly over the town center area, 3D with the UVM Spatial Analysis Lab. We did a focus group in May about what people want to see in the town center as far as uses and appearance. Then we did a survey, and that was really great because 400 people responded to it. And so we got a pretty good sense of where people are in this community about what they want to see in the town center. And Jason is going to address that when he gets into his presentation. And the next thing up for us is an open house on October 18th here at 81 Main. It's going to be from 4 to 7, and we're going to set up stations around the room for people to comment and give us input on the neighborhoods that we've identified in the new town center map. So we're really looking forward to a good turnout there. Still left to do is drafting the implementing regulations. And we are meeting with Sharon Murray, who is part of the SE group team. Tomorrow staff is to start talking about how do you translate a lot of data gathering, a lot of mapping, and a lot of resident input into a regulatory program that is going to meet the needs of the town for maybe the next 25 years in our town center, which is our growth area. So what does this look like? What forms do we want? Do we go up? Do we go out? This is all left in the hands of the community members. We're listening, and we're trying to translate what we're hearing in these different settings into what is going to be a guiding document for some years to come. Then we are going to start the regulatory phase of it, and the Planning Commission will be highly involved in that, have its work sessions, have its hearings as required under the statute, and then we will go before you. The regulatory phase will start sometime in the new year. I don't know when exactly it's going to come to you, but it will be sometime in 2018, I would hope. And that's where the rubber meets the road. So we're going to be excited to bring the implementation process forward to you. So with that, I will turn it over to Jason.
Thank you, Dana. Great, thanks, Dana. So I have a series of slides to go through that hopefully will just give everybody a general sense of the project, its history, where we have been, some of the thinking and concepts we've heard from the community, and the sort of draft versions of what the consultant team has come up with, what our thinking is to date, and where we're going to go from here. Please feel free to jump in at any point if you have any questions. Okay. Just sort of make this kind of a back and forth conversation. That's what we're here for, answer your questions, right? So, as Dana mentioned, the ETC Next is it's a process by which we're trying to reimagine the Essex Town Center. And the focus of our work is very community-based. So this entire process has been set up to get as much community input in many different formats as we can. It's not really going to be a successful outcome, successful solution. You won't really get to what the issues are if you don't give the community an opportunity to listen and to comment on what their thoughts are and what their feelings are and what their experiences are. So that's a core part of what this process we're going through is.
keep the community involved all the way through. So you'll see as we go through here some of the different levels that we've set that up. So basically the ETC next is we're taking the 1991 master plan that was created and looking at that. That's sort of the basis. That's the starting point for our evaluation of this project. What has been successful in that 91 plan? What hasn't worked so well? Try to figure out why it hasn't worked so well, and where do we go forward from here to reimagine the town center. So the first step is to assess what's happened, what works, what doesn't, as I just said. Try to understand the influences, document the pattern of where we started from, where we are today, and where we want to go in the future. We have a process by which we want to explore some of those parameters to address the goals of the community, find out what the goals of the community are, explore those goals. Then we're going to go through the envisioning process, reimagine what that 1991 plan is, what it wants to be, and come up with a new version of that. And then, as Dana mentioned, the tail end of this process is once we figure out where we want to go, we have to figure out how we're going to get there. What are the regulatory tools? What are the zoning changes? What sort of things do we need to put in place to try to help us get there? So to give you an overall sense of what the timeline is, we started this project in the end of 2016, data gathering. We did some drone work, as Dana mentioned, to fly the whole entire area, reviewed the regulations, took a look at the plans, figured out where we were, how things sort of, what happened with the 91 plan, why it didn't meet its goal. We then established the steering committee, and that's a committee that we meet with on a regular basis to help guide us. It's sort of a check-in process with those individuals, and it's a cross-section of members in the community, so lots of different input, lots of different backgrounds. So they're a good check-in point. Let us know, tell us whether we're on the right track, whether we've got to change some things, that sort of process. So we started in May 20th with a focus group, got some input, put out some survey information, got some feedback from that group. We met with the steering committee several times since then. Early June to early July, we put out a public survey, and as Dana mentioned, we got an incredible response to that survey. I think there were actually 424 responses, about 170 some odd questions, about a 15 to 20 minute survey. So it was very involved, lots of questions. Great feedback. You don't typically see that kind of a feedback for a community survey. So what it tells us is that the community is really involved in this process. They have a lot to say, and we have a lot to listen to. So it was great feedback. So from that survey, again, we've gathered some data. We've done some internal thinking as far as the consultant team goes. We've met with the steering committee several times since then, and we are getting ready for the next public workshop, which is going to occur on October 18th. And that, again, will be in this room. It's going to be a working format, so we'll have a bunch of different stations. That's the flyer you have in front of you there, Max, yes. So we'll have a bunch of different working stations, allow a lot of close interaction. It's an open house, so it'll run a long enough time span, people to come and go and sort of fit their schedule. Once we've gotten through that process, public workshop, we'll take that information, meet with the steering committee a couple more times, and then we'll come up with a draft plan, which is the written version of what we think, what our analysis is, as well as the graphic, the master plan, architectural character, some of the other components to this master plan process that we're going through. Out of that draft plan, it'll help us come up with a regulatory toolkit, we like to call it, whether it's a form-based code in certain areas, certain districts, certain neighborhoods, some other zoning processes we have in our toolkit, whether we have design standards. We don't exactly know what that full process is yet, but we're going to explore that. And then we'll bring the final plan back in front of this group, public, for sign off. That's the general time frame. So, as I said, the first public process we went through was the focus group on May 20th. The basic notion of that focus group was asked two questions: the ETC today and the ECT tomorrow. EC today is what works today, and then tomorrow is what would you like the ETC to be in the future. So there were a couple of sort of overriding comments that came out of that focus group. It was a smaller group. It was a really nice Saturday. The weather was great. So those are not the best days to kind of have for public input. Everybody likes to be outside, not inside talking about things like this. But so the ECT today, basically, we asked questions about how does it work today? How do you feel about today for retail, residential, recreation, commercial, transportation, circulation, pedestrian connectivity. As you can see, I've sort of highlighted some of the finer points, the bigger bullet points of the responses, and all of those are needs improvement. Sort of the overriding theme of ETC today, needs improvement. When you start talking about architectural design and scale, the biggest comment that came out of that was relative to the town center, too bulky and out of scale. So again, we start to get a sense of where we are today. Where we want to go tomorrow. What should the role of the ETC be? How does Route 15 come into play? Non-motorized connectivity, recreation, retail, open space. We did a visual preference survey, throw some images out there, architectural, pedestrian-based, vehicular-based, all kinds of things to just sort of elicit some response. Basically, the role of ETC was seen to be shopping and entertainment district. Route 15 should be a traffic corridor. Lots of traffic goes through that section of town. We need to keep the traffic going forward. Although there was some caveat to that, a lot of individuals feel like, yes, traffic ought to go through certain times of day, but you also want to make mobility accessible so that traffic will stop and shop at ETC if it is essentially the shopping and entertainment district. So a little bit of conflict there. We're exploring some of those options. Recreation should be neighborhood and destination focused. Retail should be a combination of both local and destination based. Residential architecture should be more in scale with what you see regionally, what you would expect New England architecture to be: 2 stories, gabled roofs, porches, that sort of thing. Retail also should be more traditional, contextual in scale, nature. So following the focus group, we sent out that survey. And as we said before, we had 424 responses, 171 questions. It was about a 15 to 20 minute process. Great response to that. Highlight a few things here. Basically, this survey mirrored what we heard in the smaller focus group. The survey was not designed to be a statistical analysis. Rather, again, just another way to elicit response from a community that could not come to the meeting. Bigger format. The survey asked a bunch of yes/no questions. It also allowed for a lot of commentary, people to provide their own independent input into the survey, and we've synthesized that, analyzed it. I believe it's a 150, 200-page document. I mean, there's a lot of information there. All of this is available on the website, I believe. Yeah. So we are currently in the process of, just to help explain where we are, what we consider the ETC. The bigger square dashed line work indicates our study area. Where we zero in with greater color is what was originally seen to be the Essex Town Center. So you can see it included, excuse me, the Golden Triangle all the way up Old Stage Road, Towers Road, 15. The 2 residential neighborhoods that sort of bookend the Golden Triangle are indicated in yellow. The historic district, which exists on the east end of 15, the Four Corners intersection, we consider there to be a transitional neighborhood in between the historic district and what on here is called the New Town Center. And then we have, of course, the New Town Center, which is the outlets, Butler's Corner, some of the residential units on the east side of Essex Way. So we're actually challenging the notion of, or the stretch, the breadth of the ETC. And actually, since this drawing was created, we're sort of changing the boundaries again, and we'll probably change a little bit more as we refine the process. going forward. But basically what you can see is we're thinking the town center is really smaller. We want to shrink it from the original boundaries and consolidate their efforts and our focus to a much more important core area around the 15 Essex Way and 289 routes. So you can see the from the previous plan, the historic district's a little bit bigger, and actually what we're thinking now is the historic district grows a little bit further west along 15 to just on the east side of the Price Chopper Shopping Center. And then the transitional district is from Price Chopper to Essex Way. And then from Essex Way, the darker brown is what we, it's the outlets, it's Boves, it's Maple Fields, that whole district there. And then we are considering some of the residential neighborhood on the north side of 15 in that corridor to be part of the town center. And we're also considering west of Old Stage Road to be a little bit within the town center, some transitional residential, lower scale, lower density residential in the yellow. So we're in the process of further sort of refining and defining what those neighborhoods are. There's an overall vision for the town center. This has draft stamped all over it because we're still having the conversations internally with ourselves and with the steering committee. 3 different options for the overall vision statement for the town center. The first one would center around the area as a mixed-use growth center. Some other details in there, but just the basics of it is number 1 is focused around the mixed-use growth center. Number 2, we would consider this focused around the ETC as a regional gateway for mixed and integrated retail. That's more a transportation focus vision statement. And then the third is the ETC is a diverse community within the town of Essex that has grown from its historic beginnings from Tower Road and extends now to 15 and 289, and has an incorporation of commercial, retail, civic, recreational land uses within that. So then we've taken it a step further, and again, as I mentioned, we have the three districts, the 3 neighborhoods, the transitional neighborhood, the historic neighborhood, and then we sort of stumble over the Essex Town Center and then the Town Center District. We've renamed the Town Center District as the Mixed Use Center Neighborhood just so we sort of lose some of that confusion. And that Mixed Use Center neighborhood is really the area we're talking about around the Essex outlets, the Boves property, Maple Fields, anything on the west side of 15 between 289 and Old Stage Road, as well as some of the adjacent property north of Route 15 along Old Stage there.
What is the Boves property?
So that would be the area north of the outlets, which has the Dunkin' Donuts, Mimosas in there, Jewels on the Green, that whole strip there. As identified in the focus groups, recreational, access to recreation, trails, multi-use bike paths are of great importance to this project and to the community. So we're exploring how those connections happen within all of the different neighborhoods within the town center. How does open space get incorporated into the town plan? How is it accessed? What happens along the Route 15 corridor from a pedestrian path standpoint, a bike path standpoint? Where are the gateways, arrival gateways from 289, from 15 coming south out of Underhill, Jericho, into the Four Corners? We're starting to explore where are the gateways both into the outer boundaries of the Essex Town Center as well as within the Essex Town Centers, within the neighborhoods. What do those gateways look like? Is there a brand that should happen within the town center? Is it something that's common through the entire place? Does it happen within the neighborhood? Some of those questions are being explored. And again, these are all great questions that we're going to pose and have an opportunity to explore on October 18th at the open house. So please come and provide your input and tell us what you think. It's vital to the process. And there's the flyer. There's the next plug. So that's the October 18th. We're going to start to get into architectural character. Something everybody loves to talk about is architectural character and what things look like, both from a residential standpoint, mixed use, commercial, retail, lots of things to talk about. What's next following that? So we have the October 18th workshop. We'll meet with the steering committee a few more times. We'll come up with a draft plan, this regulatory toolkit, meet with the steering committee a few more times probably, and then come back to you all for your input, hopefully with the final plan.
So those are just stock drawings of buildings. It just happens to be 6 stories, right?
Well, so there's a couple comments there related to those. Those are images that we are actually developing and exploring for this project. So they're not actually stock. Our architectural consultant, a team member, Weeman Lampier, will be with us here on the October 18th. The image on the left is actually only 5 stories. It's not 6. The ground floor does actually show 2 series of windows, but that is envisioned to be. The retail floors are typically 14 foot floor to floor, 12 to 14 foot height. So that's all stuff we'll get into during this open house on the 18th.
Okay.
But yes, certainly
I'm sure you
items
want
of
comments on
discussion.
that.
I'm sure we have already gotten lots of comment on that, and we're looking forward to a lot more.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And then Dana touched on a little bit. The last part of this is what is the town's role and what is the select board's role going forward. So there's certainly some things to talk about from an infrastructure improvement standpoint, water and sewer, parking, any other infrastructure items that may come up as we delve into the actual master plan and physical planning of this a little bit further and bring up some more issues and get more comments. The acceptance of the final report, and whatever zoning and regulatory changes need to be enacted as a result of the acceptance of the report in order to make this happen.
Okay, thank you. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
Open for comment.
Yeah, any questions from the board for Jason or Dana? Will we be seeing anything requested to be put into the budget to complete this in the next fiscal year, or is it all contained in what you have now, money-wise?
It's mostly contained in what we projected for this project. We are considering adding on a few more things to the next round of regulatory amendments that, for example, when we examine the town center as a growth center, there's like a residential phasing program that's imposed on it. If we end up going for a denser town center or a taller town center so that we don't sprawl out, then we would have to make changes to the residential phasing. So that might be a part of a regulatory package that we hadn't really conceived of beforehand. But we don't know. We don't, the town isn't exactly saying, we want to go up. But as planners and consultants, we want to really flesh this out thoroughly because the town also says we don't want sprawl. We don't want to see growth spreading out from our town center into our rural and conservation areas. So that's sort of a dichotomy in a process like this, and we have to tread the line because we're hearing 2 different things from the community. No sprawl, but don't go up in our town center. So that's why you have us, to figure out these really big questions, and we aren't there yet. And that's why the open house is so important. But yeah, the budgetary things I will address with you as part of our budget.
The regular process?
Yeah.
Okay, super. So we can expect to see the final report when? Could you remind me when what time frame?
We're thinking sometime at the end of this year,
Okay.
December.
Okay, very good. Mike?
Dina and Jason, would these be the only zoning changes that you would anticipate being presented to the select board?
No, as I said, we're going to do a Christmas tree thing on that package. We're going to add on some things that have been on our list for a while. You know, administrative things, housekeeping, that we as administrators we really need to accomplish, and a few other things. But we don't want to weigh this thing down, because we want it to go through. Don't want to have a bunch of other potentially controversial zoning amendments
Right.
that could make it more complex than it might already be.
So I'm pretty sure I heard two different answers there. Something,
I think it'll be more than just the ETC will be in the ordinance changes, but it might not be all that you have on your plate.
Oh, no.
For changes.
Our plate is very big.
Yeah. So it'll be selected pieces from that.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
our plate is going to take years.
Yeah.
We have a lot of stuff having to do with protection of our forestry resources, perhaps revisiting the conservation subdivision design process. We've got a lot of energy planning to do. We've got housing to do. We've got all sorts of stuff. It's literally going to take us years. But the next round of regulatory amendments is going to be this project with a few more things tacked on that we really need to just get out of the way.
that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Dana or Jason? Okay, thank you for taking us through that and giving us an update as to where you are, and we look forward to the continued work and seeing the final product that we get a chance to review. So,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next item of business, which is 5C. It's called Water Model Usage Fee, and we have Dennis. No Aaron tonight. Yeah, okay. Welcome, Dennis. How you been? So, yeah, why don't you, you could walk us through that.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Let me find it here. A couple years ago, we started off looking at a water model that was developed. To go back in history, I guess I did some in college, but they're all done by hand. In fact, there was a common test on the PE licenses to give a simple model, because it was one of these iterative things where you had to keep working around to finally get to a low value that said you were close to the solution. Thankfully, computers do that today.
Quite
don't have
quickly.
to do with that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because what we really tried to do is we got the lower end of the town done, Susie Wilson Road, the Ford area. We knew we had some situations over there where we had the need for increased fire flows, because it is one of the growth areas of town. It is one of the larger industrial portions of town in terms of the businesses that are there, and probably those that will come in the future. Lowe's, what used to be, well, Green Mountain Coffee, Keurig, whatever. They're large water users. They also have a large fire demand. When we did that study, we identified a project that sooner we will, not too far from now, will come to the board on, which is to increase a water line in the fort to provide the additional fire pressure. And the model helped us decide, among a bunch of alternatives, where was the best place to put a larger pipe to service that area at the least cost. And so Aaron and I made the conscious decision about 2 years ago to basically model the rest of the town. The upper area is a separate water district than the lower area based on pressure and where we get our water from. And to look at that upper area, we hadn't identified any significant problems. We do know that, and I think Dana knows this, the town center area it's one of those areas that's relatively high compared to where our tanks are, which means it's a lower pressure area. It's not a low pressure area, it's just lower than the rest of the town. You go down by River Road, we have more pressure than we ever want to use. You go to the upper end of town, in town center, it's normal. You get up to the area around the four corners, the pressures start to drop off. And so the question becomes one of having a model available that we could calibrate, which we've done. We had the same firm perform the service for us to go out and take a look at, and it was Aldrich and Elliott. It's a question of inputting all our line sizes, all our hydrant tests, and then essentially going through, and the easiest way to explain it is you play with the roughness factors of pipes and dimensions of pipes to see, do you have a model that can predict that if I went out to another hydrant we hadn't tested, what would that flow be? And so we've been able to do that. So we have a calibrated model. It's cost us some money. It's cost us some time. And we can absorb that. And this is not necessarily an issue that the select board has to tackle tonight, but it is an issue that we wanted to bring before you because we think it's important enough. Almost every new development that comes in the door, especially the larger ones, especially the industrial sites, be it in Saxon Hill, be it in the town center, if we were to go to multi-stories, whatever, you need to have an idea what the impact is. And a lot of times the impact of high fire flow in one part of town is not obvious because it may in fact be sufficient in that area, and you may find a short distance away that your pressure is deficient because of the fact that you're pulling so much water out of the system at that point. So we believe that we want to utilize this in almost every case of the major developments that come in. We're not going to do it for a single house or a couple unit subdivision, but where applicable, we think it needs to be run so that we can in fact have the results of that in our hands, because there's no single engineering firm that has modeled the whole town. So they're going to give us a model of the impact of a development on the immediate area, but it's really not what's the impact on the entire system. And we need to know that because, like I say, sometimes it surprises you. Again, I'll use an example. In the Susie Wilson Road area, one of the areas that has low pressure over there is up on the high point on Pinecrest. When you start to get a lot of fire flows being drawn out of Susie Wilson Road, the place that it hits first is on the higher sections of Pinecrest. And if you're only modeling the water system real close to your new development down, let's say, on Susie Wilson Road, you're never going to pick up what happens in the rest of the system. It actually is going to be less expensive for consultants to use our model, to be quite honest, because that way they can provide us the information we need. What's your demand? What's your fire flow? What's your elevation on your building, your site? And then we would run the model, and we would know what the impact of that is directly without having to rely on a third-party consultant to provide us information that we may or may not know they've run an accurate model on. I mean, I'm an engineer. I trust engineers, but I trust a model we've run better than a model that someone else may have run, to be quite honest. So what we thought an appropriate way to go about this was to identify criteria when we would use the model, and we listed 4. A development that requires the addition or extension of existing municipal water infrastructure. We're going to add another subdivision with additional pipes. That should be modeled. That's pretty easy to do. All projects that require additional water capacity greater than 125% of current approved water allocation, or 500 gallons per day. And again, we can modify that. All projects in areas where there's been identified potential deficiencies, and if we know there's an area of low flow, we want to obviously run it there. And then it may come about that there may be an inkling on our part that the model needs to be run because of our knowledge of the system that maybe another party might not have, because we deal with it all the time. So those are kind of the 4 criteria, but we'd essentially set up 2 fees. The first one would be a base fee, which is never going to pay back the cost of developing the model, but would help recoup some of those costs. And then the second part of the fee is a pass-through cost to run the model. We've actually signed a contract, and we were going to do this whether we collect a fee or not, because I think it's the right direction to go. We've signed a retainer contract with A&E to run the model, and they've indicated that the maximum they would charge would be $750 on a large project. A small project, it may be as low as a couple $100. So to go, if a developer came in and wanted to go through the process, we would run the model, but charge them, and the cost would range probably from a low of $500 to a high of $1,000 for a larger project. I don't believe any engineering firm can develop a water model anywhere near those kind of costs. So we've already absorbed those costs, but I think there should be a charge for us running that, and that's why we've come to you. Sometimes the state may come in when they review a project or Act 250 that might say, we want some additional modeling. We would be glad to do that, but that would be a separate charge. This is kind of the baseline to say we're okay in terms of reviews, we're okay in terms of approvals, those kind of things. So the way we worded this was that we requested that the Select Board approve the water model fee and the design criteria. I do not have a problem if the board wants to think about this and have us come back, but I think it's a good way to proceed I believe under the current regulations, the Planning Commission has the ability to charge a fee for review. We have not really done that, but we can. And this would fit into that process. So it's not like we're creating a new model. We just haven't used a model that's been in place probably ever since I've been here. We've absorbed all those review costs. This is the start, I think, of trying to get some of those costs back.
Okay.
That's it.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Questions for Dennis on this? Anybody? Sue?
Number 4, criteria number 4, which is really more of a, well, at least as written, is more of a subjective thing.
It's a catch-all.
I was just wondering, I mean, if there's a way to word it in a way that wouldn't make people feel like no matter what, you know, you're going to request the model.
And I don't think that's the case. I think that it probably comes back, I mean, in some cases we've identified potential deficiencies. In some cases we may be aware of some potential deficiencies, but maybe we've not identified them totally. Maybe it'd be customers calling in saying we've got a lower pressure problem when such and such happens. But we haven't gone out and studied it, and maybe that's the difference between 3 and 4. I'm the one that threw 4 in as the last catch-all. It's kind of like, you know, other work is required. If 4 was out of there, we could work with the first 3 fine. Because I think those are going to cover 99% of the situation.
Other comments, questions for Dennis? So, Dennis, you'll calibrate the model periodically then, going forward?
Running the model will calibrate it by itself, but we will. What we'll do is we will go in there. We take, as we flush hydrants, we also do pressure tests, and we don't always flush the same hydrants. Obviously, we try to flush the dead ends and all those kind of things. So we continually develop flow and hydrant data every year, and so that will be provided back to A&E to go back into the model. Over time, a lot of the pipes we have are PVC. Some are ductile iron. We have some old asbestos cement pipe that's out there, but they're all smooth, fairly smooth line pipes, and we have not come across any, other than some of the older service lines, the Fort being one example, because some of those lines go back to 1900. Some of those lines we haven't found yet, but they go back to 1900. They're cast iron. They tend to be very rough on the inside, so they can, your C factor will deteriorate over time if your pipe gets rougher, or if you get deposits in the pipe. Our piping system is not, other than those old metal pipes, and a lot of those are actually older service connections in the fort, you're not going to see a large deterioration. Will we continue to do it to run a check in the model? Yes, but I'm not sure it's going to provide us a large benefit. It's going to be more like a, here's some additional data, run it against the model, let's see if it checks.
Yeah, sanity check. Kind
Yep.
of. Okay. And do you anticipate much pushback from developers, or will they understand the value of these data?
I think they would be happy with it, because in this, it relieves almost every project, major project that comes up, we're asking the question, you know, what's the impact? What's the flow? What's the pressure? What's going to be the impact? And then we're back with them sometimes saying, you need to look at a little larger area than just the exacting surrounding pipes. And just to have an engineer sit down and run even a simple model, this is a cheaper version. It's actually going to save them money over the long run.
Okay. And it looks like the larger project, most would be about $1,000.
Yeah, we're not trying to make money off of this.
Right.
We're trying to recoup some, but I think the indication is that allows us to kind of drive the train on the water model, and we know then what we're getting as far as impacts.
Okay. Thanks, Dennis. What's the board's pleasure?
I'll make a motion
Okay.
if
Sure.
the board is done with questions.
We can have more discussion.
Okay. I move that the select board approve the water model usage fee and the 4 design criteria used to assess the need for running the water model.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Do I have a second on that? Pardon? All right, thank you, Irene. Any further discussion? Sue raised one point. Is there any, everybody's okay with the 4?
I made the motion leaving it in because of Dennis's comment that 99% are going to be covered by the first 3. It's just that
1%
It's
catch-all.
just that 1%.
Any other discussion on that? Okay, hear none. All those in favor of approving the water model usage fee signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0.
Thank you much.
Thank you, Dennis.
Stay there.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next item of business, which is 5D. And it's action relating to report entitled Sidewalk Impact Fee Study, Town of Essex, dated June 21st, 2017. And is that Dennis or Greg?
It's both of us.
Okay.
I'll let Greg make the introductions, but I'll give just a very quick overview. For a long time, this has been an issue that's come up numerous times with regard to approval of projects. In terms of an appropriate fee to be charged for a new developer for sidewalk construction, do you require a fee? Do you require them to actually put a sidewalk in? Do you require just right-of-way? And it's gone back and forth. And I have to be honest, I don't think that in the approvals that we've gone through, we've always been consistent across the board. So we wanted to try, we came to the board with a whole bunch of requests for the Regional Planning Commission for the work plan, one of which was to look at the sidewalk impact fee, have CCRPC go out and fund a study to look at that, and come back to us with some recommendations. And that's what drove the study. And with that, I'll give it to Greg.
Dennis captured most of it. I'll just add briefly, this is sort of a convenient next step or follow-up to a report you might remember that was concluded in 2014, 2015. It was the Town of Essex, Village of Essex Junction bike ed plan, bike and pedestrian plan. So this is some of the data, and this draft report builds off of that, and some of those projects that were identified in terms of sidewalks and bike paths that the community came together and pointed out as high priority items, and that the select board and trustees both adopted. So that's all I have to add, and then I'll turn it over to John Slason from RSG.
So, but this relates only to sidewalks and not to trails, right? And it relates only to areas outside the village.
Great, good clarification. My name is Jonathan Slason. I'm the project manager and also the technical lead. My team at RSG, we completed this sidewalk impact fee. And when I say sidewalk, it is actually a sidewalk and a shared use path. It would be something within the public right-of-way. So it's not a recreation path in the recreation areas. So that is what we're focusing in. Brian Davis is here from the Regional Planning Commission. They funded this study with the local match from the Town of Essex. So I have a few slides here just to go through the general process. I want to be somewhat brief. I know you have a long meeting, and save some time for any questions. There's a report that you should have. Sorry for all of you in the audience, but the report that you should have goes into a lot more detail in terms of how the numbers were derived. The purpose of this presentation is to give you a little bit of the context and to let's see if we can get some feedback on some of the values that we've tried to determine, which really is up to the town to select a way forward. The best way here. Now, the town has already impact fees, so I may not have to go into this level of detail, but it's within your statute, your rights. You have a capital impact, a capital improvement plan, and these projects would be stipulated within that if we select which projects to go forward in. But you've been running an impact fee, and it would follow the same administration protocols that you currently have. And Greg, as a point of note, we did maybe not finalize, but amend an existing ordinance for the recreation impact fee, which I haven't discussed in this presentation, but we were going, shared use paths were a bit of a, it wasn't clear whether the recreation impact fee covered shared use paths or not. And what we did is explicitly remove that element out of the fee value and then recalculate the net impact fee for the recreation impact fee. And so that now is set, it was a ordinance that the town should be able to now adopt, and we've rolled in the shared use paths into this project, into a separate impact fee. The general procedure for developing impact fees follows this simplistic table, which is that we identify the facilities affected by growth. The underlying assumption there is that there is growth, and that growth would require additional infrastructure and additional services by the town. Then we identify the particular capital projects that should be funded by impact fees that would be funded by that new development. And then we would develop a formula to compute the impact fee, and then lastly, adopt a fee ordinance. And we're at the point today where we have developed a formula, we have a range of fee values for you to consider, and lastly is that the ordinance would be a simplistic, we've already crafted the content of it. It would be determining a fee value and set up some of the waivers and exemptions that may be applicable. As Greg stated, this is follow-on to a comprehensive bicycle and pedestrian plan that both the village and the town carried out, and again, it was a funded study locally from the town and the Regional Planning Commission. And that was wrapped up and adopted in late 2014. This plan provided a comprehensive review of the future growth, the existing needs, and future needs that the town, and I'm really going to talk about just the town now, that the town would have going forward. And we've then also separated the bicycle piece out of this and only looking at the pedestrian component. So looking at the first box that we have going forward is that the growth. We've participated in a planning study that's been carried out at the Regional Planning Commission in looking at population growth as well as employment growth within every municipality in the county, including the town and the village of Essex. And we've determined that an approximate growth rate of 0.55% annual average rate would result in a net gain of approximately 600 new residents over the next 10-year horizon. On average, 59 to 60 residents per year would be expected into the town itself. Then moving quickly into the non-residential space. We went into this with an assumption that the fee would be imposed on both residential and non-residential uses. It became a logical question trying to understand who uses sidewalks, why do they use them, and it was determined that on this basis, we have a formula that I'll show in just a minute, that we tried to work out the percentage of use within non-residential versus residential. So going forward with the assumption that we would have non-residential users participate in this impact fee, we had to get an idea of the growth rate in non-residential square footage. Developing impact fees, you typically develop them on a unit that is quite standard and easy to calculate and not subject to a lot of variation within projects. And so the square footage number for a non-residential use was preferred. That aligns well with trip generation estimates. Often water and employees are also somewhat related to the square footage of particular land uses. This chart here shows this hockey stick, if you will, end for the most recent years in the town. We see that there's clearly been a significant increase in non-residential permits that have been applied for in the town and actual space constructed. We envision that will moderate, and we've selected a 10-year rolling median. This is what this chart represents. And then we've also looked at the forecast in terms of the employment for the next 10, 20 years in the town from the Regional Planning Commission. And we've determined that a basis of about 98,000 square feet per year would be an appropriate number to base the growth on, and that would result in somewhere about 1,400 new employees over the next 10 years. It's a sizable number. The Regional Planning Commission demographic forecast resulted in about 1,900 workers over the next 10 years for both the village and the town. So the town is taking up the majority of that estimate. And from the conversations that we've had on the project committee is that made sense given the amount of land area and the industrial uses and some of the land development potential that the town has. So when we look at the growth, we net result in about 600 new residents and 1,400 new employees. From that, we look at developing an impact fee. Wanted to say first, the bike and ped plan gave us the foundation in which we felt comfortable developing a multimodal, a non-roadway based, or somewhat a non-traditional impact fee, but it's a sidewalk. And sidewalks now have been given the full legitimacy of capacity and transportation capacity in the eyes of the Vermont legislature. And so more and more we're seeing sidewalks and multimodal paths come up with impact fees. The Bike and Ped Plan gave us that foundation to identify that there would be a need in the future, and they created a list of projects that we were looking and investigating in when we're selecting which projects might be eligible for this particular impact fee. The first thing that we need to check when developing an impact fee is that the growth would demand some of those additional services or the additional capacity of the sidewalks. This table, not going to go into it in detail, but the orange rows there, the orange numbers, gives us these standards of service or levels of service that for sidewalks it's not a absolute science or at least agreed upon standard of service. Such as pressure or something on a water line, unfortunately. So we've looked at miles of sidewalk and shared use paths per 100 bedrooms, and we've looked at also miles per 1,000 square feet of non-residential space, as well as miles per employees. And in all of the metrics that we've used is that if we just continue on our current capital funding trajectory, we're not going to keep up by maintaining that same miles per unit as growth happens within the town. So we're expecting that residential development continues, non-residential development continues, and if we're only putting in the amount of money that we have today allocated to sidewalks, we're simply not going to be able to afford to build the amount of sidewalk linear feet that that population would deserve based on their current expectations or standards as of today. So this is the first check, and that provides us a logic, if you will, to say we need more infrastructure. And then it creates that nexus for impact fees to say that growth should pay for some of that new capacity so that we can maintain a standard going out to the future. Now, going into the project selection, is that that plan identified over 20 projects that might be relevant for the town with a pedestrian focus. We narrowed that down. We looked at really what would be a possible construction horizon within a 10 or 15 year period. And the reason why a 10 or 15 year is that impact fees have to be expended on a project within 6 years of collection. And so what this gives us is that we would expect to initiate some projects sooner, and then we would anticipate some projects at the end of that 6 years would just be starting on kind of that 10-year project, if you will, because you're allowed to pay for preliminary design and engineering and the initial phases of projects. This table gives you the snapshot, and we'll go into more detail later, but we have 15 projects that have arisen from a prioritization process that was also carried out within this study. 15 projects of pedestrian projects that we identified would be eligible for impact fees. It's unlikely that in a horizon of a 10-year plan such as this that we'd be able to financially afford or physically construct 15 projects. And therefore, we've kind of focused on maybe between 5 and 10 projects might be more realistic, and trying to develop an impact fee to initiate those top 5 or 10 projects. What this table shows is that the total cost, as well as the local match that would be used, which is comprised of our dedicated capital spending stream, which is $40,000 budgeted per year on sidewalks, as well as then any impact fee dollars that would go into those projects. That's what that cumulative match is. And then those are the cumulative miles of new projects that would be added to the existing mileage. This table, I'm not going to go project by project, but these are our top 10 projects that were selected based on the master bike and ped plan and then prioritized within this study. This prioritization process was done with the project steering committee. It tried to account for safety, connectivity, and as well as construction feasibility, which also had a cost component to it, to develop a total score. It's somewhat outside of the focus. While the actual project is important, when we come down to it, we're trying to identify mileage as well as what total fee value we think that we can afford. And so what we recommend is that this project list gets identified in the ordinance and say, up to this amount of money and up to because at the end of the day, Dennis needs flexibility to determine which sidewalk project might be the most appropriate to fund at any particular year. And so we would recommend is that this list be maintained and that we should identify then which project would be funded on any particular year. And so this prioritization process is just helpful, but it gives us kind of the top bound, if you will, that no more than 10 projects would be funded probably by impact fees. That's the purpose of this. This formula, I apologize for the formatting on this sheet, but basically what we're saying is that we have a residential fee and a non-residential fee. For a residential fee, we're doing a cost per bedroom basis. And then in a non-residential fee, we're doing a cost per 1,000 square feet. And how we got there is that we identified what percentage of the sidewalk capacity is associated with residential uses versus non-residential uses. And it uses this typical two-process idea in which we understand the magnitude of growth, which is 70% non-residential and 30% residential. And then we made an assumption based on their degree of usage. And we said residential users, they have 7 days a week, and potentially, we don't know who's home and who's not. We said up to 24 hours they could be using the sidewalk. Versus the non-residential users, we said they're there for 5 days on typical and a typical 8-hour working day. And so then that way we came up with a weighted average that at the end of the funding, we're putting 64% of the sidewalk on residential fees versus 36% on non-residential. As we said, the residential unit is bedrooms. I first mentioned 600 people population. You're probably saying, what's the connection there? We did do an investigation, that's in the report, in terms of understanding people per household, the number of bedrooms per household, and trying to get a trajectory. And it's been a recent average that we felt comfortable extending into the future. Approximately 123 bedrooms per year is the median number that have been constructed over the last 5 years, and we continue that out to the future. Based on the number of bedrooms per household as well as the number of households per year being developed and the population, we've kind of fact-checked all those different numbers to feel comfortable that the number of bedrooms that we're arriving at about 123 per year aligns well with that 60 residents per year. That's been on average, is that we're building more bedrooms than residents. That's been the typical pattern. The non-residential square footage, we've broken this into 5 key land uses. Accommodation purposes, which are all your hotels and short-term stays. Commercial, which is all your professional offices, as any other professional. Industrial uses, pretty standard there. The K through 12 is private and public schools, and retail uses. And what we've done there is understand the typical square footage that's associated per employee in these different land uses. And we understand their current employment numbers, and that we have an idea then of how many new employees we have, and we've broken them up into those different sectors. And we're applying a non-residential fee across, we're treating all non-residential equally, if you will. A accommodation takes as much sidewalk use as an industrial use. However, in this table, what we show is that a commercial use is 160% more intense than your current average non-residential building. So I apologize if we can go into more detail and question of this. I don't want to belabor this table. There is more description in the report. I want to kind of get to the next table, which is the more worthy of consideration. But the last thing I will say about this use is that this is a standard procedure for non-residential uses, is that some residential uses have less intensity in terms of employees per square footage than others. And so a fee that would be assessed to a non-residential use, it would be hopefully more fair based on the appropriate degree of impact. And that's what we're really focusing on, impact fees, is maintaining that connection. This table here is kind of where we want to have a discussion and where the select board needs to reflect, as well as we're going to have a meeting with the planning commission. And that we have the top 5 through 10 projects, as well as all 15 on this table in the different columns. And then as we come down this, we see the total project cost, and then we start getting down to how much money is out of that total project cost attributed to growth and that local impact fee amount. That's that 4th line on that table. Then we take that 36-64 split and we apply it to residential versus non-residential. That's what you see below the residential line and the non-residential. We see the different total impact fee dollars associated with the different uses. And that row 7, I guess it is, or 6, the residential sidewalk fee per bedroom. That's kind of the end story, if you will. If we look at impact fees and how it would affect residential development going in the town, what this table orients you is that if we funded the top 5 projects, every bedroom would be charged $106 impact fee, versus if we funded all the top 10, they would be charged $470 per bedroom. That's that range of values for the impact fees. The non-residential side follows that same trajectory, and that if we can maybe use the accommodation use, for instance, it goes from $28 or $29 per 1,000 square feet up to $128 and change per 1,000 square feet. This table will be adjusted by credits that we provide, and that's credits are simply a chance to reduce the probability that any project that pays impact fees will pay for the same project twice. Because property taxes are also funding these same sidewalk projects, there is a potential that any new development, they pay their property tax as well as paying the impact fee. And so there's a small credit off of the impact fee to reduce that probability. And that's what's currently in the ordinance for the recreation impact fee as well. That's frankly where we've come to. And that's the end of the report that we have. We have all the derivation of the values, and we have the rationale for this. The next steps that we have is that we need to get an agreement on what fee value would be appropriate, and then understand whether there'd be any waivers or exemptions that we would recommend. For instance, we would probably exempt any any public school expansion. No sense really in the town paying the town itself. So that could be an appropriate exemption of the impact fee. And then whether there's any waivers, such as maybe affordable housing or any land uses that we want to incentivize, there might be some waivers. And I'm using my terminology there very carefully, is that a waiver admits that there would be some degree of impact, but an exemption would say this land use, we're excluding any consideration of impact. What I will close on is that part of the impact fee process is that you want to ensure that you're not developing any excess capacity and you're not burdening growth by providing a better standard of service than today. And what I will tell you is that you'd have to fund all 15 projects there before you're approaching that level of standard of service. So you should have confidence that while all the fees might look relatively high relative to zero today, but you can fund all top 10, and in essence you're still declining in miles per unit of level of service.
Losing ground.
Yep.
Good. Thank you, Don. So, yes, Dennis.
Again, just a couple of quick points, just in a broad perspective, because sometimes we look at all the numbers and it's like you get lost with them. But I think one of the important things is if you look at the total project cost and the total local amount, in each case, our assumption on all these projects is we're going to have to go after grants to do the projects. They're large projects. And so part of the issue is how many grants can you obtain for paths over a 10 or 15 year period. And our experience has been some years we get lucky, some years we don't get lucky. Right now, V-Trans is putting a lot of money into stormwater. They're taking some of their pedestrian money and other money and put it into stormwater. So there's kind of almost a little bit of a hiatus right now in terms of that money. So, does it look good next year? We'll be able to put in a grant and get money? I don't know. But historically, we usually have had a grant of somewhere between every 2 to 3 years. Some years we've gotten a couple, but it's generally been along that time frame. So that gives you a range. If you're talking a 10 to 15 year period, top 5 is probably fairly realistic and optimistic that we could do. Realistic. Top 10 or top 15 in a 10 or 15 year period is probably stretching what we've been able to get in terms of grants. And so those numbers are based on grants. I mean, that's reality. I think that the other thing is when you look at that, then it becomes a cost per bedroom. And part of the issue with all of these, and I don't think that's why any of us have come yet to the board to say we suggest a number or a position, is that it is a cost placed on developers. However, right now, that total local share of building sidewalks, we're not building maybe as many as we should because we don't have that financial assistance to do it. It's also a delicate situation because if you're unlucky enough to have a piece of property that's sitting right in one of the growth areas, you're going to get hit with a pretty big impact fee. Or we'll go to the planning commission and fight to get a pretty big impact fee. We don't always win, to be quite honest. I mean, it's the planning commission makes their own decision. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm not faulting them. I'm just saying sometimes we would argue that there's a sidewalk that's really needed there, and the developer has a better argument, and we lose. At the same point in time, there are projects that are going on in another part of town where we probably won't build a sidewalk in the next 10 or 15 years, or a path. But if they're all developing and they're all utilizing our facilities, should some of those funds go into a central pot that we can put towards those projects on this list that we need the most? So we're spreading that damage amongst a lot more people, so to speak, or that cost, but we're trying to get the costs back to a point where we can put them to use. It doesn't really do us any good if the approval says build a sidewalk out on the end of Old Stage Road. Who the heck's going to use it? 4 houses and they go off a cliff at the end? Doesn't make any sense. But should they pay an impact fee where we could use that to put a path or sidewalk along Route 15, maybe up here between the village and the town center? And so that's part of the argument of why it makes sense to perhaps charge an impact fee. The hard part is it is a fee. It would be a fee to go on new development, which obviously gets passed on to a new homeowner or a new business. It's got to be paid for in some way, shape, or form. Our intent was to have a study that if at some point this goes forward and we adopt this, and I know that you're going to go to the Planning Commission and talk to them about it at the same time, so it may come from the Planning Commission back to you guys in terms of how we approach this, but I think that's going to be a decision that has to be made by the Select Board if we are going to do this and create this type of impact fee that would apply across the board to new development. I mean, it's something that if we get to a point where it's non-adoptable, at least we've had the discussion, because up to now we haven't had the discussion, and to me the basis for this is the type of thing that if someone said, I'm going to go out and sue the town of Essex, we've got a technical basis why we chose a particular fee that I think would stand up in terms of the technical analysis. Where before, quite honestly, Aaron and I are often put on the spot by trying to come up with an impact fee for a development, and it's really inconsistent and hard to do. And we'd rather have it as a matter of policy rather than a couple of engineers trying to figure out what a fair cost is.
So it's more predictable too by the developers.
Yeah.
Okay, questions for Dennis or Jonathan from the board? Sue?
I'm just curious, how do these proposed impact fees compare to some of our neighboring communities?
I don't know if I have the full answer, and that would be a great question to come back to you with. But typically, sidewalks are rolled into a transportation impact fee, and that's on the order typically, I could say $700 to a couple $1,000 per household, and so that's it would be a fee value that'd be associated for this type of infrastructure, probably around that $200 per bedroom would be associated. So that would be more consistent with other communities around Chittenden County.
Irene?
same tack of what other towns are doing, how does our residential level of service, that miles per 100 bedrooms, compare with other towns? Are we woefully behind, or
Yeah.
just keeping up? Do you have a sense?
To be honest, I
of
don't have
at all?
that answer.
You don't know, okay.
No,
Is that something you can get?
not very easily.
Nice.
So you haven't done a study like this for,
No,
like, the
that's
next
right.
town
We're
over?
doing it for the city of South Burlington right now, but that's
Okay.
very early days.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? Andy?
Yeah, regarding the dedicated funding, the 40K per year, why do we keep that flat? I guess part of the, I mean, I assume it comes from the 2% capital tax, which runs with the grand list, but in the study here, it keeps flat, or is it?
It's just the way we've been funding it in recent years is $40,000 a year in the capital fund. I suppose we could always reconsider it, but that seems to be what we've been doing. What's acceptable gives us some money in the sidewalk capital budget for when grants do become available, that we can try to match that.
And then the follow-on to that is just for clarity and understanding that 2% capital tax is across the entire town, right?
Correct.
So we're taking that $40,000, but it only funds sidewalks outside the village. Is that correct, or do we?
Believe so. Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? So, community surveys have shown that connectivity via sidewalks and trails are a high priority in our community, right? So this is trying to enable that wish of the community to try to do better connectivity. And by allowing this fee, you can then better manage what pieces get connected. So as you said, on Old Stage, you wouldn't have to put in a sidewalk that nobody would use. Okay. And in general, is it about $1 million per mile or something of sidewalk on average? About. So all the work that would be done would need to be done by grants. So this money that we would collect is really for matching, right? I don't know if we'd ever do a sidewalk on our own without that.
We have we have a very small amount in the operating budget. Every year we try to bump that a little bit. It's for sidewalk and curbs, and a lot of times it goes for, we'll have a section that needs repair, and it almost always goes to repairs as opposed to new sidewalks. Any of the new sidewalks in past that we've built that have had any sense of length have come through grants through the capital fund.
Right.
And it is an area right now, to Andy's comment, it's an area that if you look at the bottom line of the capital fund, which I think end of next month, I've got to provide you a report on that, the financial report. We've been lucky and gotten a fair number of grants. We had the one which we did over on Route 2A. We've got one for Pinecrest to complete that loop, which is in the mill. And we've got another one out on Towers Road, which is in the mill. And those have used up a substantial amount of our reserves. So there's not a whole lot left in the kitty. So to Andy's question, might you see in the capital account a request for more than 40,000? You might. I guess the question is and it is a very good question, what is that sustainable number out of our capital tax over the long term? And it has gone to sidewalks in the town. We are working with the village on a separate scoping study right now for bicycle and paths along Route 15 at the other end, and we're doing a scoping study up on Athens, from Athens Drive up to the center, and the second one. Whether those are going to lead to projects, I don't know, but those would be town-village projects. So it is changing, but up to now, it's been dedicated to town walks.
Denny, is there a standard for, let's say, length of road and whether or not you need two sides or one side sidewalked? Is there some kind of an engineering best practice or standard?
I'll answer that one. I think it's really, to me, based on safety. We have some older roads that don't have any sidewalks, but there's only 10 houses on them, and people seem to survive by walking in the street. Not the best, but it works. But there, you take the small subdivisions with the cul-de-sac, sidewalk on one side, I think that's pretty much what the planning commission has done in a lot of recent cases, seems to be adequate. Route 15, no way. You need, so I mean, it's really dependent, if you have 15,000 cars a day on a road, or even 10,000 or 7,000, want people to walk, you need sidewalks on both sides. If you have that small traffic volume of 100 cars a day in a shorter road, then you can get away with one, or in some cases, maybe none. Prefer to have at least one, but there's a lot of roads in town that were built, back in the 60s that don't have any sidewalks at all.
So a couple of clarifying questions. If a developer is required by the planning commission to put in a sidewalk on their current project, would they then be exempt from having to also pay a fee because they've already done their part?
If it was a sidewalk length that was not within the list of projects that are in the top 10, let's say, in this ordinance, then they would be required to pay an impact fee and install that sidewalk. If they install a sidewalk that overlaps with the project list, depending on how many projects we identify that we want to spend, if the sidewalk overlaps that list, then they would be given a credit for the cost, however, up to that impact fee cost. Most likely the sidewalk costs more than their impact fee.
Okay. And the residential impact fee, that's just for new builds, right? That's just for new.
Any new bedrooms. You could
Okay.
decide if there's any reason to waive auxiliary or minor subdivisions or in-law apartments or anything like that, but I would say it's every bedroom that comes through get a zoning permit.
Okay. So what kind of pushback do you expect from developers? I mean, I can see the advantage for the residents. What about pushback from the developers? This is adding cost to their projects now.
It's going to be standard practice throughout Chittenden County.
Yeah, it's okay.
And I think funding multimodal transportation infrastructure, this is a way that has come forward in terms of its science and the evidence. And as we said, the bicycle and pedestrian plan that came initially provides a real good foundation for the needs and articulates that there's a community vision for why these projects are necessary.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, go ahead. Irene?
Are you saying we're trendsetters? When it comes
Sure.
to sidewalks?
Yeah.
It sounds like we're out front of this.
I think keeping it
Pretty exciting.
as a separate fee, it's slightly unique, but I think it gives you a greater clarity and transparency versus other communities that may roll it into a general transportation impact fee.
So the benefit to the developer is that it would be more predictable then, is that right? This fee, I mean, they would know it.
They know that what they're going to get clearly out of this fee is that there's no balancing act between a roadway improvement versus a sidewalk. In this case, you're paying for sidewalks or shared use paths.
So,
What's the history behind why we don't have that general transportation fee thing?
This
Do
is
you know?
This has
Right.
been wrapped into the rec impact fee, which was enacted in 2004, I believe. Or traffic impact fees, transportation impact fees. Speaking for Dennis, sorry Dennis, for cut me off when I need to. But Public Works has kind of looked at it on network areas, so certain parts of town, Susie Wilson corridor, Allen Martin, Route 15 corridor, some of those areas, and sort of done studies for certain regions or networks and implemented fees based on impacts to those areas, as opposed to a town-wide transportation fee. And that's usually more road-based.
Greg's right. There's really three principal areas in the built-up. There's an impact fee in the Saxon Hill area, but it's based a little differently. It's based not only on a volume and where it impacts. You have to look at where exactly is that traffic going and where are the needs. So it's more immediate, maybe over a 5 or 10 year period. For example, you guys all sat through the Route 15 Allen Martin study. We already have a signal down at the bottom of Sand Hill and River Road. So I won't say it's solved, but at least from a transportation point of view, it's a signal, the level of service is okay. It's not something that's going to pop up anytime short. So up in the upper area, our biggest concern is that 15 intersection. Our also biggest concern is that with this industrial park, there's a heavy truckload which has a big impact on the road, so we levy a dual impact fee up there, one on weight and one on impact on the intersection. Susie Wilson Road is different, because Susie Wilson Road, the whole corridor needs work. And so that's a little different impact fee. And then Route 15 at the Essex Center area is a third impact fee based upon build-out that goes back a few years. We also have an impact fee we put on the gravel roads. And that is pretty much uniform. Again, should we get some of those fees codified? Probably yes. When we get to it, it's a great idea, I think, to do. I think especially on the gravel road portions, it would clear up a lot of stuff, and maybe that goes on our long to-do list. It's there someplace. On the other ones, the other piece of that, though, in transportation that's difficult right now, which makes this one kind of beneficial. We're running into a clash of impact fees on transportation. I don't know if John's seen this or not, but I have. The state decided a couple of years ago to impose impact fees. So on projects that impact a state highway, they're charging an impact fee. We already are charging an impact fee. And so we've had to negotiate some of these impact fees. We recently had a project off of Susan Wilson Road, a very relatively small project on one of the small roads, and we charge an impact fee because of its impact on Kellogg and that corridor. The state also wanted to charge an impact fee because of the impact on 2A and 15. And it took half a dozen phone calls and 3 engineers to convince the state, and they came around ultimately not to charge an impact fee because the project was small and so far away from their intersection. But if we go to the Planning Commission with a requested impact fee for that development, and the Transportation Agency does also, we've doubled that developer's costs for the same need. And so those we've had to back off or negotiate. So some of those transportation impact fees, we've had to say, we will take a share of that fee, where in the past it was ours to collect and put towards the projects. So you're going to see us collecting on these larger projects, especially whatever happens in the town center. We're going to be fighting with the state over who gets those traffic impact fees. We don't have to fight if we do on pedestrian walkways if we adopt this kind of a cost structure.
So tonight you're looking for the select board to accept the report, and then it would get finalized and then come back to us for potential adoption.
I think the intent was to bring this also to the Planning Commission so they can see it, ask questions, get their input, look at the ordinance that John's drafted. We'll have a chance to go through it and then come to the board with a firm recommendation that I think our intent tonight was, if you don't want us to go there, save us from work and stop it now. If you want us to go there, we'll continue on the route we're going, I guess. That's really the purpose of tonight's presentation.
Andy?
Just got one clarification. I think I heard both of you say it, but I just want the clarification that this fee currently exists within the recreation impact fee. Is that what you said? Then we're pulling it out so it is more discrete and specific?
Basically, this is
Okay.
more specific and it's more detailed. The analysis that Jonathan and RSG did is way more in-depth than the sidewalk component of the rec impact fee. But yes, right now the rec impact fee has a component for sidewalks.
Okay. Thanks.
Irene?
So would the rec impact fee decrease accordingly?
Yes. Maybe not necessarily a one-to-one, but it would, yes.
The previous rec fee had an assumption of fee value per unit of development, and so simply that's been eliminated, and so the fee was reduced by that value. So we remained, the existing study that was done for the recreation fee remains intact, and so it's simply a line item subtraction.
Okay. Irene?
I wondered if somehow in 1.0 and 2.0, because it's right at the beginning of the report, we could put the outside the village only phrase after we say Town of Essex, because, the Town of Essex to many people is the whole enchilada.
I think it says that later in
It
that
says it
same
later,
paragraph.
it says it at the end of 2.1, but I'd really
Yeah.
like it at the front of 1.0 in the first sentence, and then like at the front of 2.1 in the first sentence if possible.
Just to clarify that.
Just so
Yeah,
the front people aren't wondering.
I saw that too, yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so what's the board's pleasure? Andy?
I move that the select board accept the report as submitted and direct the staff to develop an implementation plan in consultation with the planning commission and Conservation Trails Committee for adoption by the Select Board.
Thank you, Andy. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second if he accepts it as modified.
Right.
With what you just suggested?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, yes, fine.
Thank you.
As modified, yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so who seconded that? You did, okay. All right, any further discussion on accepting this report?
That's great.
Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you for the work. Thanks
Thank you very
for
much for
walking
your
us
time.
through that.
Appreciate it.
And we'll look forward to it coming back. Okay. Next item of business is 5E, and we have the winter operations plan. Dennis.
I guess I'm still here.
Pinch me.
Irene was kind enough to go through and provide me with some corrections to it, and I appreciate those corrections, and we'll make those. They don't change the substance, but they do add to the report, so I appreciate that. That we will do.
Okay.
We did put this on the webpage so that we could get any public input. To my knowledge, we have not had any.
Okay, I was going to ask you that question. Did you
yeah.
get any?
We have not had any. We're going to the trustees at the following meeting. We're planning to go ahead. I think there's just, and I don't want to drag this out. I'll answer any questions you have, but I think that there's two things that are important. One, as most years, but this year more than ever, we're working with new people. We're interviewing someone tomorrow that we hopefully will add to our staff, our drivers. We're short one right now, and we've gotten some really great new employees. The problem is that it takes you a while. First, you have to get your CDL. You need to learn to plow, and in my view, you don't really become a really good plow driver for about 5 years. You can do it in 3, and we have confidence we'll put people on the larger trucks, but we've lost people, and we've not gotten those new people trained yet to the level where we can interchange employees if 2 or 3 people get sick. We're going to be short. We're going to be parking trucks in some cases because it isn't worth taking the risk of taking an employee who may be great on a pickup truck or may be great on a low pro and put them into a large truck and put them on Susie Wilson Road at 5 o'clock with traffic.
With bad visibility.
Pardon?
Possibly bad visibility if
Yes.
it's snowing, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
so we've got a lot of training to do for this winter. We plan to do that, but a lot of it's half art, half science, and it just takes you time to get there. One of the things we have done, and we've increased the scope of it this year, is we have hired a contractor to do, and it's in the report if you look at the maps, to do the town center area. And we've expanded that a little bit because it is, our crew is used to working on a certain type of road. Cul-de-sacs, main roads, gravel roads. They're not used to plowing the Burlington type of situation, which is what the town center is becoming. And when you have sidewalks that are 15 feet that extend from the curb to the front door of a business, and they're public sidewalks, which they have up there, and you have angled parking, which they have up there, it takes special equipment to do that, and it takes people committed to do that. And so we have contracted with the same firm we used last year, but we've expanded their contract somewhat. It does come at an expense. So where last year's contract was a certain dollar value, we're about 50% more cost this winter, and my hope with this, about the same budget as the previous year, maybe even cut a little. My hope is that we, through smart salting practices and smart operation, we can reduce our other costs so that we don't go over budget on winter operations. So those are the only 2 messages I have. Otherwise, there isn't much changed in the report or in the plan, and my recommendation request is that they get approved.
Thank you, Dennis. Questions for Dennis on the winter operations plan? So,
I just had I only have 2, or 3, I guess, but I guess I could have given to you today after I reviewed it. But on page 7, where you're talking about resources available to assist in the planning and execution of winter operations, and it talks about weather forecasts and road conditions. I know I rely on 511BT, the website. Does it makes I think you mentioned calling 511,
Okay,
but
so there's a website.
there's a
too.
website
Yeah.
too.
And the other thing I've noticed that's happened, it's only happened in the last probably 6 months, but Vermont Local Roads used to be run by the St. Michael's crew. They no longer are. They're run actually by the Agency of Transportation. And they've been real good on providing NOAA weather forecasts directly to the towns. And so when we had all the summer storms coming through, quite honestly, they were a reminder where I might be busy doing something, and all of a sudden I'll get an email from them indicating what the weather forecast is coming for tomorrow, and you can expect high winds and this kind of thing. So that's another source we haven't put in here, but it comes directly to us. It's not really a public source, so to speak. It is public, but it comes to us directly. So maybe that's another one we can put in. Good?
Anything else?
Yeah,
Dennis, you
so.
have a few more, right?
Yeah, just a couple more. So, on the, mailbox replacement,
Yes.
when's the last time that how long has it been set at $45?
About 2 years ago?
2 years, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so
It
not
was,
bad.
at one point, it was, I think, 30 or something, like 25 or 30, and we raised it. We took a look at, we went to Lowe's and
Right.
got prices and what it would cost to buy the lumber and buy the simple mailbox, and it came in at about $45. So we haven't, when we were at 30, we had a couple complaints, and we looked at it and changed it.
It was time to-
Last year, we replaced a few and didn't have any complaints with the $45.
If you had said, it's been that way for 10 years, I would
No,
probably
no,
say.
no, that's
Just
what we
wanna go
actually-
do a little
good
shopping
question.
Yeah,
and see if
the
that's
public
still-
wanted us to raise it, and we did.
Okay. All right. And my last is more on a question on, it's both on the Town 8 and the Village 5. There's this table that shows actuals and budgets.
Yes.
And the first two columns are the actual and budget for the same year span, 2015, 2016. But then the second two columns, the first one is the actuals for 2016, 2017, and the last is the budget for 2017, 2018.
Sue, what page are you on?
T8, and it's the same table as on.
Right, it's the same.
on
The village last
V5.
year asked the question of why we had different numbers for the village, and they're a little harder to come by because of the way they do their accounting. But what we tried to show, is the fact that in 15, 16, we were, it was a mild winter, and you can see that by and the budget was based upon historically what's kind of an average winter. So, that's what I was trying to show with those two numbers. The other one, in 16, 17, we had a pretty tough winter, and you can see the difference there, the overtime hours. We didn't spend a lot of time on overtime, but we had a lot of ice storms, which used up a ton of sand, and so that's kind of obvious. And then the salt was again, kind of comparable to the previous year's budget, and what we used in a easy year kind of showed what a high year was. And then this shows the budget that we're going into this year. It's kind of just trying to give a relationship between what we did in different time frames and how they kind of relate to each other. And that's all I was trying to do. I wasn't trying to do a whole budget comparison. I could have done 2016-17 actual, 2016-17 budget, 2017-18. I could have added
Right,
another column.
right.
I just left it off.
Okay. I think that, so that they're just different snippets of information.
Right.
because
It's
they're
an
from-
indicator.
Okay.
It's an indicator of what occurred during that time frame.
Anything else, Sue?
No.
Anybody else?
Would you like a motion?
I would.
I would move that the select board approve the winter operations plan for 2017 through 2018.
Thank you, Irene. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Sue. Any further discussion? I'd like to say thanks for putting the track change on. That's
Yeah.
very helpful when it comes time to look at what's different. So,
Okay.
way to go. Thank you. And, okay. Anything else?
Eddie, this is getting better and better every year.
It does.
Well, we're working at it.
Yeah.
It's thicker every year, too.
Yeah, it's a great, it's.
Maybe that's the
try not
definition
to,
of
but-
better, yeah.
I keep it on hand throughout the winter.
But it,
No, we didn't.
I didn't think so.
What?
It's still discussion.
No, we haven't voted yet.
Still discussion.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the 2017-2018 winter operations plan signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Dennis, you were saying something?
I just wanted to mention that I didn't really want to get my name in the paper, but I know you all probably read the article about Colchester and the problems they're having in terms of following of private roads
Yes.
and decisions that were made. And it's difficult, but this kind of a document, and I won't say anymore, makes our job much easier because it defines what we do. You define, I mean, we provide it to you, but in the end result, you define what you want done, and then we try to meet that standard. And if you're a community that hasn't done that, then you start to get into problems in terms of, well, why are you plowing my street, or why are you not doing this or that? And it's not throwing darts at another community. It's not intended at all. It's just there's a value to doing this, and I know it's thick, it's boring to read sometimes, but it's really helpful in terms of carrying out what you guys want done.
Yeah, no, it's
And
good
I
to have it
appreciate
documented. Absolutely. Yeah. So, excellent. Thank you.
I thought you were very diplomatic, to be honest with you.
I was trying to be very careful.
Yes, it showed.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next item of business, which is 5F, and that's FYE 17 funds. And Dennis?
That's my last one.
It's the Dennis show.
This year, we had a significant underspending of the public works budget, and it was caused, some of it we did on purpose, but it's really hard ahead of time sometimes to figure out where we're going on various things. One of the things, there's two things, but one is the police parking lot. When Doug was still here, we talked about that at length, and we knew that within the budget for the police department and with the settlement that was made on the parking lot, there was not going to be enough funds left in the capital fund to pave that parking lot. And so we talked about it, and the decision was that we would take it out of the public works paving budget. And we would have done that. It would have been an accomplished fact were it not for the fact that the spring was so wet. And we just could not get to it and get it done until the new fiscal year. So that money really went unspent on paving projects because we were just basically going to reserve it out and save it for that purpose. So at this point, I mean, there's a couple of choices. One, this request is that you actually take it from the unspent 2017 funds and dedicate it to that purpose. The other option is it would have to come out of capital funds, which my perspective, I would prefer to do, or you take my savings and put it back into the general fund, and then you end up with the issue of how much is left in the general fund over your base value that I know you've talked about, the 15% or whatever else. And this is a way to solve a couple problems. One is to take it from the unspent highway funds and put it to the purpose for which at least we had intended to use it, which is to pave the parking lot. So that's one piece of the request. But to do that, it's an action that the select board has to take. And the other one is, I know I've sent memos down, and with other meetings you've had, I'm not sure if you've seen the one. I don't know if it's for this meeting or the next meeting to go. It's one on, we went ahead and applied for some stormwater grants, and by the time we've given you the memo to explain the fact we're getting ahead of you, we got the grants, which is great. However, there's not enough money in the kitty to pay for the local share of those grants. So we've got to work through a program of how we're going to do that. We underspent, and some of this, this part of it was not really due to the wet spring or the problems of trying to get the project done earlier like the police department was. This was really due to the fact that the state has been slow to put out the new requirements. We expect a new MS4 permit around the 1st of January with a whole bunch of changes in there that are going to require us to do a lot of stuff for phosphorus removal. So one of the grants that we got, and we've been working with the village closely, one of the grants that Chelsea put in the village for was for $50,000, $10,000 in local money, which is coming out of our capital stormwater account, to develop a phosphorus control plan for the town. So we know under the new permit we're going to have to remove phosphorus. But how do we do that? Is it just fixing up the gravel roads? Is it rebuilding some of the old stormwater basins? Is it building new facilities? Where do we get the best bang for our buck to meet the standards? So in the midst of all this, we've used up a lot of our stormwater money, but the state is trying to push out as much money as they can quickly to basically show the powers that be, which is EPA and on up the food chain, that we're on board to get the lake cleaned up. So they want that money out the door. There's another whole round of grants that are coming in November. And I'm going to meet with the village and with Annie and with the Stormwater Committee and talk about, do we go out on a limb and pick some projects and put them in for grants before we even have a phosphorus control plan in place? Because we have a good chance of capturing that money now, because by the time everybody gets their plans done, everybody's going to want the money. Right now, it's going to sound terrible, but they're almost shoveling out the door. Take it, and as long as you can guarantee a local share at some point in time, and it's a valid project, we'll fund it. So now is the time to get on board with that. So quite honestly, it might mean the $30,000 isn't a lot, but it goes into that pot to help us maybe offset some of those grants. But at some point, and I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself, we may come back to the board and say it might be a good idea in the springtime to go for a bond issue for some dollar value of funds for that one grant we've already gotten, as well as some other grants if we put in for we may get. Because if we can get 80% funded versus future grant funding, which is probably going to be from the Agency of Natural Resources at 50%, we're crazy not to grab the money now. We just have to make sure we pick the right projects.
To leverage what money we
The
have.
leverage. I mean, if I didn't know how we were going to do this, the one project that we're talking about at 1.5 million. It was kind of like, it's a great idea, it's part of our flow restoration plan, but how are we going to afford it? We put in the grant, we got it. So now we've got to come up with 200 and some thousand, which is a lot better than having to come up with 1.5 million. And we've got to do it.
Quite a bit.
And we're going to have to do the phosphorus. So do we start to look at how do we put together a financial package to leverage those grants, and do we go after more grants? So the next deadline is in, I think, November 22nd. So a decision, we're going to have to talk about it and see if it's the right thing to do.
Do we have the capacity to administer the grants?
Good question.
We're going to, I think at this point we have to figure out how to make the capacity. I know Andy looks at me and goes looking for a gun, I think. But we're going to have to, and I think that's what we have Dan for, and Aaron and myself, and we've got to figure out a way to process the grants and get the work done. Some of these grants may take 2 to 3 or 4 years to go to a point where we're actually constructing them. So we've got some time, and we may have to build up some more capability. We may have to, as a part of the grant package, we may have to contract some of that inspection work out that we want to do ourselves. Mm-hmm. But if we don't jump on the train now, I'm concerned that it's going to leave the station without us. And so this 30,000 is a part of that request, but it's really a small dollar value compared to really what we're going to need. And I'm not talking about a bond issue that's millions and millions of dollars, but it may be $500,000. You know, it's still a big bond issue, but at some point, if we're going to do this and we want to get the money early, it might be worth going to the voters on.
And we're required to do it.
We're required to do it. So it makes a whole lot of sense, and my gut feeling is the voters will accept that, knowing that we've gone after and proactive in getting this money. And now it's a question, it's not if you're going to get the grant, we've got the grant, we just need to come up with a local share.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, questions for Dennis on this one? Andy?
I'm not sure. Yeah, that's going to be a tough one to explain, maybe. So, in a couple of months, we're going to get the big, thick book with everybody's budgets in it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to include, fiscal year 17 budget, fiscal year 17 actuals, and then it's going to have 18 budget and 18 projected. Where do these monies show up in that, or do they?
They would show up as, if you approve this motion, approve the recommendation, it would show up as an actual expenditure or costing against FY17 funds. So instead of showing Public Works as being underspent by $90,000, the sum of these two, which is 38,559 and 30, it would be reduced by $68,000. So you would show Public Works ending the year as 30,000 under budget, or the highway is 30,000 under budget, as opposed to being 90,000 under budget. Because if it's 90,000 under budget, the extra 60,000 is going into the capital, the long-term reserve.
I'm surprised at that answer, but is that how it really works? That,
They haven't closed the books yet on 17, so you can,
if you spend the money now,
can
you can
legally,
say, you
the
can
select
put it
board
into
can
the-
legally, Doug's done it before, we checked with Lauren, it's legal to do. You can actually indicate an expenditure to take out, what you're really directing, and Pat can correct me, he's better at finance than I am, but you're actually directing those funds for a specific purpose, to be taken from that FY17 balance. Is that correct, Pat?
Yeah, that's a better answer. Yes.
Yeah,
Money's in the
we're-
fund balance now.
Yeah,
Then
money
we're
is
saying-
currently in the fund balance.
Right,
And
we're-
it can be specifically designated
Yeah.
for this purpose.
Yeah, we're taking out of undesignated fund balance and
Yeah.
designating
Exactly
it. Yes, okay. All right, that makes more sense. So right,
Yeah.
the part of the fund balance I wanted to give back.
No,
Coming in
no,
Well, this is actually over and above that amount, because whatever you discussed previously was old fund balance. This
Right,
actually
right,
adds to that
right,
fund
right.
balance,
Yeah, I agree.
which
I-
partially
I
corrects the
get it,
problem of
yeah.
adding to the fund balance.
yes.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else on that one, Andy?
Nope.
Okay. Anybody else? Dennis on this one? Okay, what's the board's pleasure?
I'll make a motion if you have one, Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Got a question before?
I'm sorry. This doesn't cascade into further years because you're taking work that was supposed to have been done in FY17. We're doing it in 18, but we already had a full slate of projects for 18.
It will shift. It's not going to slow anything. What it may, I mean, the decision that Doug and I had come to earlier was that we were going to have to find a gap to pay for that parking lot, or that was going to, again, have to come out of fund balance or out of the capital reserve.
I was thinking more about time.
Well, time-wise, I don't see that. Time-wise, we've accomplished, we put out all our projects for bid this summer. I think the only difference is that what we also do is, and it's a certain amount of Mother Nature controls. I never spend all the dollars that are available to me for what I would call drainage, summer construction, sidewalk in the fall. I always postpone and save some of those dollars till spring, because quite honestly, if we have a terrible winter and those costs go up, I don't do some things in the spring that we would plan to do to basically pay for a tough winter. Conversely, if we have a light winter and we save money, I will try to use that money to fix some other projects that need to be done. Sometimes, once in a while, Mother Nature steps in and says, that's a great plan, or I'm going to rain the whole month of April, May, and June, and you're not going to spend any of that money. And that's partially what happened this year, in addition to what happened with the police department, but that's partially what happened. So we've caught up, but I can't guarantee that in another year we might not be in the same position. It's a certain degree of risk.
Mike?
We're gonna make a motion.
Yes, if it pleases the board. I move the select board to authorize the transfer of $39,604.20 in highway fiscal year end 17 fund balance to pay of final cost on the reconstruction of the police department parking lot, and also dedicate $30,000 and 0 cents of the storm water FYE 17 fund balance to the stormwater capital account.
Thank you, Mike. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Irene. Okay, any further discussion on this? On transferring these funds from fund balance? Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. Hey,
you
Dennis, I
very
think you're
much.
done
Good
for
evening.
tonight, aren't you?
Thanks, Dennis.
Well done, Dennis.
Thanks for hanging in there.
As usual.
Thank you.
Nicely done, yeah. Okay, we're going to move on, keep things moving. We're at business item 5G. It's adoption of revised conflict of interest policy. Greg, you want to tell us what's going on here?
So you saw the conflict of interest policy at your last meeting on September 11th. You accepted it then and gave me some feedback to take back and put into the policy, which I did. Mostly minor stuff, removing some contradictory language in Article 8, in section 11.1, noticing that the vice chair can be the point person for having discussion if the chair is the one potentially having conflict of interest. Some minor changes beyond that. Looking at it again with Pat and Max, a couple other questions came up of definition of a gift. That's in 5C. What exactly is a gift in terms of conflict of interest and what would reach that criteria? And also in section 11.A2 talks about how a public officer may, or the board may admonish a public officer in private if it's determined that a conflict of interest policy or conflict of interest violation has occurred. Could potentially clarify that as being executive session. I think they're minor enough that we can make notes of them and bring it to you in April when you adopt these again. But just pointing those out, capturing those things. Otherwise, looking for you to adopt the revised conflict of interest policy.
Thank you, Greg. Larry?
I had a question about the gift part. I'm looking at some VLCT language that talks about there's an exception for items of a de minimis nature valued at $20 or less. Will we be that specific in your language?
We could be.
I mean, I think it's important to follow that model languages that they give us for different.
Yeah, so you'll give some options in April, and we can see.
Sure.
Perhaps
We
it's
just get a
falling
free
in.
ticket to the Quilt Festival and a free parking pass for the fair every year that
Mhm.
comes to us.
Well,
Pat?
if I may,
What about
most of the times, those quote-unquote gifts really are paid for out of the marketing budget from year to year by the agency issuing them. So when the fair has its ribbon-cutting ceremonies to open the new season, they send out a number of invitations, and along with the invitations is free parking and entrance into the fair. In bygone years, the value of those tickets were zero. They've always made sure they were zero and explained that they came from the marketing budget. They weren't. It wasn't a gift of any way, manner, shape, or form that had any value. Moreover, when events were not sold out, they also had marketing strategies that allowed them to give gifts so people can come to the various events, just to put people in the stands, sort of thing. So I would not view those as gifts, whether it's worth $20 or $12 or whatever, because that isn't the point. It doesn't benefit us financially in any way, manner, shape, or form in our job. Our presence benefits them. So recently, Irene, myself, Max were at the ribbon cutting ceremony at 3 o'clock in the afternoon of the fair. It's a lovely day. It was a short ceremony, which is usually the best ceremonies. But, we were able to park, and then we could walk around inside, look around, and go home.
And I spent quite a bit of money there, so.
You
I
didn't?
mean,
Oh,
the point
see,
is,
good.
I helped the economy, so.
So the
I
marketing
think
worked.
the win was,
Paid off.
it was all theirs, but
Brian, no.
it's my opinion.
We also have, if I may, I don't mean to
Yeah, go
dominate
ahead,
the
Matt.
discussion now. We also have a no gift sort of part of our purchasing policies that are tied into bids or any of those kinds of things, which generally include things that just come to us as employees. Somebody got a $100 tip for plowing a road a couple of winters ago and couldn't accept it. We have gifts come through the door all the time at the holiday season, of chocolates or other delicacies, and so we put them out for everybody's use, rather than insult the giver, so that citizens coming in, vendors coming in, employees, anybody can have a chocolate or whatever the gift was. So it's something that we've been made hypersensitive to, we in government for many, many, many years, because if it's proven that somebody did take a gift for an award for a bid and a recommendation, let's say, to the select board, that's serious stuff. That award can be vacated, and that person could get into a lot of trouble, not just being fired, but perhaps even more. So we've been hypersensitive to gifts a long time. So the thing, I find that word a bit troubling in this sense, because it's there, but that's why we'll come back in April to give you the 360, to clarify these things a little more finely, so that by accident you don't get in any difficulties.
Okay. Anything else on this one? Ready?
Yeah, something that Irene brought up last time, the question of taking the gavel away from the chair if there's any concern about bias. I just wanted to, I thought about that more, and and maybe Irene can share some clarity on this. I was wondering if this was associated with the chair being a member of a committee that was reporting out to the select board. And I'm wondering if we should consider, I don't know if it's appropriate to make it a requirement that if the chair is a member of a committee that's reporting to the select board, that they not chair that portion of the meeting, or whether that would simply be covered under the question of conflict of interest. Because I think it could be considered in that, but it's slightly different because it's not recusing yourself. You'd have to leave the room it's a different scenario where giving up the gavel for a portion of the meeting is different than leaving the room. So it's not the same thing. So I guess if you have a conflict of interest, here we go, maybe this is the way to say it. If the chair has a conflict of interest, or there's a perceived conflict of interest associated with a committee that the chair is participating in, what is the proper path? I don't believe that the proper path is that the chair would have to recuse themselves and leave the room. That's what our conflict of interest policy says, the way it's written right now. And so, yeah. So.
Is that really conflict of interest?
Well, no. I'm not saying that it is. I'm not saying that it is. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if there's a perception of conflict of interest, what do you do? It is fully up to an individual to say yes or no. I can deal with this conflict of interest, and I'm going to stay in the room. But is it always if the chair says, well, maybe you're right, maybe I am coming into this room with a bias because I've been on that committee and I've helped form the position of that committee, and I think it's inappropriate for me to run this part of the meeting. The only recourse that person has is to recuse themselves and leave the room. That may be appropriate, or is it not? I don't know if it is. I don't know if that's. Is there an option of relinquishing control of the meeting? So this is really, I'm sorry, it's specific to the select board, not specific to you, or the chair, any chair. If there's a conflict of interest or a perception of a conflict of interest or a concern by the chair that they're participating by running the meeting could taint the whole discussion of the select board, how do you deal with that?
I think I saw Sue's hand
Yeah, I
first,
think
then
the
Irene.
conflict, I think that what you're referencing is role-based, so it's the conflict of being in that role rather than being a more equivalent role during that discussion.
Right, potentially controlling the discussion,
Right,
or
right.
And so I've wrestled with that also, thinking about this issue, and I think I came down on the side of, I think it's more of the orderly conduct section of the policy.
That's why I brought it up this one. It could be
Rather
either
than
one.
this, because I do think that recusal is appropriate for conflict, but that for a bias, orderly conduct, there should just be an extra bullet that says if the chair doesn't feel they can be equivalent, or if someone feels the chair is an equivalent, the gavel may be passed to the next person in line, and so on and so on. And that way they can stay in the room, because it's not a real recusal, it's just a passing of the power from it.
So there'd be perception, maybe bias, but an abuse of privilege. Because the chair.
That's the right way to say it.
The chair, in part, makes sure everybody has a say, but the chair also calls for votes and lots of other things, and so, yeah, and if you gave if the chair turned over the gavel to the vice chair for that particular discussion, there would be no perception of any abuse of privilege for running that part of the meeting.
Are you okay with doing it in the orderly conduct policy, or do you think it belongs
Yes.
in the conflict of interest?
No, I think you're right.
Yeah, I agree now, but I wanted to bring it up in this one
I
because
appreciate you
this
did,
one
because it would be
came up.
too late.
This one came up
Yes.
first on the agenda, right? So I
Right.
wanted to have that discussion, right?
Thank you.
No, that's good.
in, should I raise my hand? Yeah, orderly conduct. I don't know that the intent is to make it a requirement that the chair relinquish the gavel if they are participating in a committee. I think the question is, the question is or the question the chair would need to ask themselves is there a perception that I might have a problem here, or will I have a problem, or do I want to risk having a problem? And I think it's still the same way with a recusal. It's a personal decision, and you can explain yourself and justify yourself. If it doesn't work out well, then you've got whatever the ramifications are of not following the orderly conduct of business. So. All right.
Okay. Larry?
Speaking of perceptions of conflict, we do mention that at the beginning of Article 7, once there's been a disclosure of an actual or perceived conflict. But we don't say that right up front, so I'd love to add the word under A1 on page 1. Right now it says a direct or indirect personal or financial interest. I'd love to say a real or perceived direct or indirect personal, because again, that's VLCT language. They talk all the time about real or perceived, and I'd like to have that parallel.
Where did you want that,
as well?
Aaron?
In A1?
A1,
where-
under Article 3 definitions, I'm sorry. Article 3 definitions, it says,
Yeah, a
a
direct-
conflict of interest means the following, and I would just like to say a real or perceived direct or indirect personal
Okay.
or financial interest.
Got it.
Could. That'd be great. Thank you.
It's just the perception.
Yeah, because usually it's perceived, the perception is usually much more frequent than real. You give the perception,
Is it-
Any other, Larry?
Yeah, is it understood that the gavel gets passed, because we don't say anywhere in here, and Sue is quoted in the minutes, lines 250 to 252, asking that the gavel be handed over, and staff agreed that to put it in here, but I don't see it in here.
Well, I
that
think
the gavel
Robert's,
actually physically
we,
is handed over.
in April, we vote to follow our procedures for Robert's rules, and I think in Robert's rules that,
Is that
in the
one?
absence of the chair, it automatically goes to the vice
Okay.
chair.
All right,
So
so make sure that that's in there.
we're pretty much good to go.
Okay, anything else on this one?
Nothing.
No? Good, okay. I entertain a motion to adopt it.
I thought we were going to come back. with
I'd
other
like to come
language.
back in April.
Well,
Or
you
else
can-
come back again this fall with these changes. There's a lot of changes here.
Well, in April's the
Oh, April,
organizational
April.
meeting,
Yeah,
yeah.
but we will have forgotten. That's 6 months away.
So
I'd
that's-
like to see it again.
But
Right?
you could adopt what's
Adopt
presented
this.
now, and
Yeah.
I've been taking notes, and
Yeah.
I can bring that back to you in April with the further revisions.
Right,
Or we
because-
can push it off for another 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
I want to see it again while it's fresh in my mind, if that's possible.
Okay.
April's a long way away.
What's the board's pleasure? I hear postponing it, but I see other faces, so.
Uh,
Andy?
So the likely substantive changes will be definition of gift.
Defining gift, looking at whether it's a $20 de minimis or just some better clarification, and then adding real or perceived conflict of interest is what I have in my notes to change.
And
this
changing
policy.
private in 11A2 to say executive session?
Yes.
So pretty much,
What was
I mean,
that
pretty
one?
much.
I think
I
it's,
missed that one.
That's page 4, Sue, under Article 11, enforcement. So it'd be 11A2, the very end, where it says, if appropriate, the board may admonish the offending public officer in private. And it was just to clarify that in private means in executive session. Doesn't mean in your car, because it's the board doing it, so it would have to be an executive session. Mike?
Why, I'm trying to figure out why we're kicking the can one more time here. I don't think there's that many changes, and I don't see
Yeah,
why
I
we
don't
couldn't
see that.
approve them
We can-
in changes as
I'd
amended.
like to. I'd like to do that. Can we do that?
And I have no idea why a discussion of April of 2018 is entering into this now.
I think because we look at it every April, and what I think Greg was saying is that in April, he would have the gifts, a recommendation for what a definition of gift is. He would change the private to executive session and add real or perceived. in front of A1 in April. So he's taking notes to say what would come back in April, is all. And, I mean, it seems like we modify this every year, right? So,
But why not make the changes now?
Right.
And then and then have a fresh document for the next 6 months, and then bring it up again in April?
because I don't think we know what the definition of gift should be at this point, right? That's the one.
This
that's
part of it
open.
would take some work. There's a clean copy, which we looked at it 3 weeks ago in September. I took the feedback and incorporated it here. There's a clean copy ready to be signed. It was accepted in September. It can be adopted now, based on the last discussion. There's a few more points that have come up tonight, and when we take a look again in April, I can incorporate those changes, or we can kick it out 2 more weeks to have those other changes considered. And usually this is done in April. It's one of those things that you looked at it in April, and then frankly I dropped the ball as lots of transitions were going on and picked it back up again in September. So that's why we're seeing it now, and that's why the time frame's a little off.
I don't think there's any blame to be pointed to here. I just can't see why we can't get this thing with a check mark next to it as done.
There's nothing that says you can't offer that as a motion. Sue?
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning with Mike. I think maybe the gift one, because that needs to be kind of brought into focus, how that should be. Maybe that one is in April. But the other changes that were suggested, I think if we could just get those incorporated and we approve it with those couple of changes and call it done at this point.
Works for me.
Sounds good. Good suggestion. So,
I move the select board adopt the amendments to the conflict of interest policy as amended in this meeting on 2 October 2017.
okay, thank you, Mike. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Sue. Any further discussion on that? Andy?
Do we need to specifically say that we're not going to include the gift, the language about the gifts?
Well, we're going to keep the word gifts in there. It's
Yeah.
just we haven't defined it, that's all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
to be specific, Mike, that means in A1, or what is it? Article of definitions, 1A, it's going to be, in front of direct or indirect, it's going to say real or perceived, direct or indirect. And then on page 4, in Article 11, enforcement, A2 at the end, in private will be scratched out, and it will say in executive session. Right, those are
Yep.
okay. That's what you know. Okay, all those in favor of adopting the policy as amended, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. Work through that one. Okay, we're going to move on to 5H, adoption of revised rules and regs for orderly conduct of business. Greg?
So again, you saw this back in September. I took some of the changes and incorporated them, mostly minor stuff in the preamble, participation, motions and votes. Andy and Irene just referenced the discussion about impartiality and bias and what to do in that case. I didn't have any brilliant ideas, so I didn't do much with it. But otherwise.
You said C policy.
No, well, so, yeah, the one potential change is
Oh,
under
that's coming, okay.
conflict of interest, so number 5, under motions and votes, this is on page 1, 2, 3,
I'm sorry, I was ahead of the thing.
4. Looking at it again, number 5 talks about conflict of interest. It's probably simpler to just take that out and say, refer to the conflict of interest policy.
Rather than trying to redefine it here.
Exactly. So, again, same discussions we just had, can adopt it as is for now and tweak it again in April, or make a motion to accept it and changing number 5 to refer to the conflict of interest policy.
I vote for
I'm going to let Sue go.
Well, just, I mean, I think that conversation at the last meeting about and the one that we were just having here, where if there is the perception of bias, bias by the chair because of the role that they're playing and the role that they played on something else, I think that we do need to somehow represent that. I know that you said you had a,
Just to clarify, you're speaking specifically if the chair was on a committee and that committee is up for discussion? That's the
I
time?
think that's an example.
That's an example, right?
Yeah.
So you said something about bias, though. How does that fit into?
I think if the chair either recognizes that they would have difficulty not being biased in leading the conversation, or if they are coming in from another assignment to report out, I think that those would both be examples where either the chair determines that they're not the appropriate one to lead the conversation, or based on input that it should be someone else leading the discussion.
It's still not clear to me about the bias piece, because if it's say the Stormwater Committee is up for discussion about something, and I'm on that committee, so you're saying in that case, it would be best to pass it the gavel, to have that discussion about the committee that I sit on.
If you feel that you can't lead the discussion in a unbiased way.
So I have some proposed language, but feel free to shoot it down. For number 9, I would propose saying something such as, if there's a real or perceived bias on the part of the chair, the gavel should be passed to the next in line for the duration of that agenda item.
Irene, which number 9 did you, under motions and votes?
Under
or-
motions and votes, but it could go somewhere else if that's the wrong place. Could it be conduct of meetings? Yeah, I think it goes under conduct of meetings, actually, right?
Yeah. I'm kind of concerned about that, because we all have opinions, including the chair.
Absolutely.
And the chair's opinion may be in direct conflict with somebody else's, for good reason, on both sides. So it could appear to be a bias, because he's or she has an opinion that's different than others. And to have that be perceived as reason to pass the gavel doesn't make sense to me. Because if somebody says something that the chair doesn't believe is in the best interest of the community, he has an obligation, or she has an obligation, to say what they believe is in the best interest of the community. That could be perceived as a bias. Now he's biased, or she's biased about it. And is that the case at which you'd say the gavel has to be passed? Because that's what it potentially sounds like. I saw Sue, and then I'll go to you.
So this already says under the conduct of meeting that there's a reference to the impartial role of the chair. So I think we're just expanding where, so it's already a given that the chair should be acting in an impartial or unbiased way when leading discussion. Not to say that you don't have opinions, and at some point you can jump in on a discussion just like we can jump in on a discussion. But in terms of how you are managing and orchestrating the conversation, that needs to be done in an impartial or unbiased way. And I think we're just talking about that part of your role. And this.
That part of the chair's role. Let's
Thank
not
you.
make it personal,
yes,
please.
Thank you. I was just actually about to say that.
Andy, you had your hand up?
I was going to say a similar thing, that I don't think the intent is to squash the chair's opinion. It's to make sure that the order of the meeting proceeds in a way that reflects the impartiality, and this is a.
And there's subtle ways, and there's subtle ways you can do that, and that is by always making sure that you're the last to speak on a given topic, making sure you don't ignore somebody who's raised their hand in favor of somebody who's already spoken and they keep going back. There's those kind of little things that, in the aggregate could show bias of an outcome because, the chair might be calling on just those people. And I'm speaking from my own personal experience, nothing here, in the passive boards. I have to continually kick myself for not opening my mouth until be the last person to speak and make sure everybody else is heard. And then, if I don't have anything really good to add, I won't say anything, just call for the votes to keep it impartial. Because oftentimes people will look to the chair to move things along, and if you do it too fast, then that could send the wrong signal. If you do it too slow, then you lose the whole point of the discussion sometimes, and that could send the wrong signal. So it's a tough job. Anyhow, I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about if the chair is contradicting people who are in the audience, saying, but this is the way it is. I mean, this is an isolated, rare incident, but I think in the interest of checks and balances, we need to add something, because this was a huge issue for the public as well as for the board in recent memory. And since we're the ones with that memory, I think it behooves us to put that in here so that in the future, years down the road, if it happens again, there are ways to make sure that it doesn't unfold the way it did, which is really unfortunate, I think.
What would the process be?
Like I said, if there's a real or perceived bias.
What would the process be
I think you
if
need-
one person says that there is a bias, does that require the gavel to change hands? Or would 2 people or 3 people need to agree to that? Because I don't think it's right to have one person, or even 2, I think it would need to be the majority of the board that would make that decision.
Then it becomes a political decision. I don't want it to be political. It is.
I still believe it's a personal decision, and that just like a conflict of interest, we can't force the board can't force a conflict of interest decision on somebody. I think it's a similar thing. I think it needs to be the chair's discretion, and certainly I guess the other members of the board can question it, but it still, I believe, is the chair's decision. I wonder, is this kind of thing already covered in Robert's Rules of Order somewhere? I don't know.
I don't know what that was.
Trend setting again.
Yeah, so I'm leery of proposing words tonight to try to approve. I think if
You could look for it if you would like, just to.
yeah.
It's a real issue. I think,
Yes.
if people in the audience are saying it, people at the board table are saying it, there is a real or perceived question. Do you need a majority of the people in the room? I don't think so. I think,
No,
it's
not
just
the room.
that sense of, well, what makes the board more special than people in the audience who've spent hours waiting for an item to come up, and at 10:30 at night they're saying, wait a minute, I'm not feeling heard. I think we have to
Because we're the elected
listen
board.
to them. Yes, we are, but our power should not be abused to shut people up in the audience just because we don't want to hear what they're saying. And I think that to codify that is a good check and balance on the power, and right now there's none.
So what research could you do to see what the Robert's Rules has for that?
I can look into Robert's rules. I can take another knock at playing with some language. Potentially to something effective. If the chair does not believe he or she can act impartially, he or she may allow the vice chair to lead the discussion for that item on the agenda. Something to that
Sounds good.
effect.
Sounds good. That works. Sure.
So
Thank you.
what's the board's pleasure? Do you want to have that get added in, kick this down the road, or do you want to adopt it with that in there? Or what's the board's pleasure on that? Andy?
I'd prefer not to adopt it with that off-the-cuff language at this point. I'm fine with adopting it as it's written and then amending it in April, or updating it in April in our organizational meeting, or near there.
Okay, so what's the motion?
I guess I'm gonna disagree with Andy. I think we've taken it pretty far. This is the second meeting, we're having the same discussion. I think it's important to put it, and I think your language is pretty close to being there. I mean, if we need to just have this come back one more meeting to review that language and approve it, I think that that's a good plan.
Over to you guys. You want to see it come back on the 16th with the proposed language?
Yeah.
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay.
So do you want a motion to that effect, or are you good?
No, I think, I
Consensus?
don't think we need a motion.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and thank you all. We're going to move on to the next item of business, which is 5I, that's acceptance of select board computer use policy. Greg?
This is a new policy for you to look at, brand new. So the town has ordered tablets for the select board, which we will unveil once this select board computer use policy is adopted. The idea is that it's going to make it a lot more easy to distribute packets, easier to distribute updated materials. It's going to save a whole lot of staff time. Travis spends about 3 hours, and that's probably a pretty conservative estimate.
Number.
Very conservative estimate. Every 2 weeks, putting packets together and rearranging papers and order. Then he has to drive a couple packets down to the police station. The senior van drivers deliver other packets. All told, just in terms of staff time, it'll probably save at least $2,600 per year. It does not include printing costs. These are some Microsoft Surface Pro 3 tablets that we have. Put together a policy for it. And walking you through the policy, this is developed in large part with IT in the manager's office. Kind of talking about the purpose of the policy, why we're looking to move to tablets, making sure the select board and all new members in the future get training to figure out how to use those tablets, when to use the tablets, how to update the tablets, what to do if there's problems, if you need repairs, how the tablets are to be used during meetings, confidentiality, public records, caring for and using the tablets going forward, updates to them, and what happens with damages and theft and any of those things that we hope to avoid but are inevitable at some point. So I'm happy to answer any questions about it, but the idea is to accept the computer use policy tonight, bring it back on the 16th to have it adopted with any tweaks, changes that are necessary, and then schedule a training with the entire select board with our IT staff to walk you through how to use these and what to expect and get into some of the weeds of some of the policy stuff that's laid out here. Ideally, talking to IT, preference is to have the meeting happen, or the training orientation meeting happen with all of you in the same room so they can say everything once in the same language and not be playing telephone and accidentally saying different things to different people. Also having preference that it not happen on a meeting night. They don't think it'll take more than half an hour, but hate to schedule something and then have it bump up against your regularly scheduled meeting. So if you want to adopt the policy and allow staff to schedule a time for that training, we can set up some doodle polls and do some stuff to figure out a time that works for everybody.
Questions? Raise hands up.
How many packets get printed right now? By Travis.
1, 2, 3, 8 at least.
And how many tablets were purchased?
5.
So how will these other 3 people get the information they need?
I have a laptop. Sam, I guess we can get electronic copies too. And Pat, I believe you have a laptop too, right?
I have one over at the village, but being an old dog, I like paper if it's going to be something I'm making a presentation on. I'm just more comfortable speaking to you from a piece of paper that I can look at while I'm talking. But that would be the only instance in which I would want the paper. And that's what I do in the village, basically. However, if I may continue on, one problem that I've had is that if my machine isn't working, and I mean at the meeting, then I'm kind of glued to the screen because everything is up on the screen. So I become more of a attendee than an active participant. And that might be something just to pay attention to. So I don't know what the solution is, except Lauren sits next to me in the village, and she's sort of the IT person there. Greg sits next to me here, but he doesn't sit next to you. And even, I don't know, Greg, are you gonna set yourself up as the meeting guru for the iPads, the computers?
I can be, yeah. I would probably be sitting through the training as well.
Okay, never mind, then, that's just something that is a caution, that's all I'm saying.
Item 2 lists 2 documents that we need to read and sign. The Town of Essex Electronic Communication and Computer Use Agreement. This is the one for you, for normal, the employees also.
Correct, and that has not been updated since early 2000, so there's a draft in the works right now, and the idea is to get that to you on the 16th as well.
Okay. And then I just noticed that the next one says the Select Board Computer Use Agreement, but at the top of it, it's titled Policy. Is that just a
Oh, that's a good catch.
silly thing, maybe? But I don't know if I'm jumping ahead of Irene. You had her hand up before. Number 9 says use and conduct during meetings, says that you can only use it to access Essex website or village website or the shared storage location. You can't go off and Google something during a meeting if we need to know what pecuniary means, or?
No, and the idea is to keep everybody on the same page, so I'd have a laptop that can either be hooked up to that board, or I can pull up that computer, so if somebody says, what does pecuniary mean? I'll type it up, and everyone can see it at once.
Or he'll look it up on his phone.
Irene, you had
A couple, will somebody like Sam be invited to training since she's gonna be required to be accessing this stuff as well? Or is it the device-sensitive training that?
Potentially, yeah, we'll have to figure that out. That's a good point.
Yeah, the number 9 makes it sound to me, only town-issued computer devices shall be used, which I guess, Pat, means you can't use your village device.
No, I can't.
Is that geared towards security? I'm not sure what the.
It's geared towards security. IT has set it up so the tablets that the board will receive can access the right file sharing document online, make sure they're tracking updates and security measures.
So if a member wants to print their own paper copies for number 6, how secure is that? You know what I'm saying? I'm looking for a parity there. Like if Pat needs something printed, well, now he's not using the computer device. And that's fine, right? According to this, you can print out paper copies of the packet.
I'd say
Is that a security issue for you guys, or not really?
I'd say it's no more or less secure than the packets you have right now.
Well, I agree.
Confidential
But we're getting rid of
materials,
this.
we're trusting the board to keep them confidential.
anything else, Irene? before we
I have
move
a few, but I'll let Sue go. 'cause I
Sue?
have the
I just
floor.
have a couple. Under 12, J, always transport the equipment within the case provided by the town.
We will provide a case, and there's a few other instances in here where it references some stuff that once you go through training, we'll get into the weeds a little bit more, and you'll get a case, you'll get a cleaning device, those types of
I
things.
mean, I guess is there the opportunity to have a case approved by the town for use? If we wanted to use a different case?
I think we
You know what I
can
mean?
bring that up, and if IT signs off on the
Does that need
case.
to be in here, or?
Provided by or approved by the town?
Yeah, there you go, thank you. Number 13, device updates. This reference to showing up at least 10 minutes prior to the meeting. Is that because once the meeting starts, you may not have access to your?
That's
meeting?
that's the risk. Just so you try to turn off your computer sometimes or turn it on, and it takes 3, 5, 10 minutes to load to do the system update. It's
Is there a
just
way to say not now, you know?
I would have to follow up and check on that one.
Okay, all right. And then, number 16, it says, shall return the devices to the IT department within 48 hours. 48 hours of what? Of when you leave, or?
48 hours of your end of term or departure from the board.
or from this planet.
Hopefully I didn't.
There are only so many ways one can leave the select board, right? I
Yeah.
mean, but that's a little awkward.
Well, those Mars trips come up and people are still on board. Eh?
That's right.
So-
You know it.
So did your question get answered, Sue?
I think so.
I can add a phrase within 48 hours of leaving the board.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Uh,
Maureen?
So, we're talking about savings that will be engendered by doing this. I'm just wondering if there's a cost associated with digitizing current paper-based resources. For example, I know on my shelf, back in the old day, we got a personnel handbook, a select board handbook, the charter, the municipal code, a policy book, holiday listings, and union contracts, all in different binders that are on my shelf. I'm not so sure that Sue has any or all of those now, because I think we're less paper-based and we don't print out as much stuff. But, will Travis be putting all that stuff online? Because I think that's important for all five of us to be on an equal playing field as far as what documents we can access, and what's the cost associated with that? Because I don't want this to be framed as win-win-win, when there may be some cost to doing this, but we haven't really done, that I've seen, and I haven't missed a meeting, sort of a 360 on, is this the direction we want to move in, and why? I remember Doug last spring saying, get back to me if you have any feedback, and he never wrote a memo that I recall that said, I got the feedback from the board, and it's this, and this. We're proposing doing tablets, and this is why. These are the pros, these are the cons. I don't remember anything like that, and it's so different than when Dennis comes here or anybody else with an issue, and we spend a half hour talking about all the different sides of the issue. So I'm really taken aback by sort of the haste that I feel that we now have a policy we're expected to sign very soon, with all these different requirements and opinions that seem to be codified, and I still have a whole lot of questions as to the actual science behind what we're doing and everything else. Like I said, costs, pros, cons. I'm just really amazed that this is such a different process, or lack thereof, than anything else on this agenda, for example, tonight. And I'm just, I guess, disappointed in some ways that I feel like we're under pressure because the tablets have already been purchased. That's $2,700 that's been spent. And I just feel like, is that a lot of money? It's as much money as Travis is going to save, so I guess it's as much money as you think it is, but we spend that all the time here pretty quickly and pretty easily. And I just wish, I was reading about the type of computer that you spec'd, and I hear that the 4s are out now and they've got better trackballs and better keyboards. Why didn't we get the 4s instead of the 3s? I just have a lot of questions about the whole thing. So, feel free to answer or not, but I just wanted to express that this doesn't follow the pattern of what I'm used to seeing, the caliber of conversation, discussion, and just research behind the decision. And I know part of that's the Doug left and probably dropped it on your lap, Greg, and I'm not pointing fingers, I'm just flabbergasted that it's come to this.
So are you saying that the discussion that we did have was incomplete or not to your level of convincing? Because
I remember being brought to the budget.
I remember you were the only one when we did have it that said you wanted to keep paper.
I don't think we had a conversation. I remember in the budget session, setting
Yes.
aside some money in case we go this route, and then Doug said, we're gonna talk about this, get back to me if you have feedback. I never saw a memo from Doug, but like I said, maybe I missed it, that laid out the pros and cons, the possible costs, the possible savings. Like I said, that 360 that we're so famous for, and I just am a little surprised to be getting to October
Well, is it
with the policy ready to sign.
Is it conceivable that we could have a policy before we have the discussion, so that we at least know how it's gonna be used? It wouldn't be a brand-new discussion, because it's a topic that's got a history. It goes back to 2009, or 2000 and something.
11, when we were told it was
11,
rude
okay.
to use a computer in this room, which is a whole other discussion we haven't had.
11, yeah. So, I was just curious. Yes.
Just to answer a couple of your questions. The first one, in terms of electronic records and time and cost. Pretty much everything we have is electronic. If we're producing something, it's
Great.
electronic, and we save it as a PDF, and then we don't have to go through the printing. So basically, everything is electronic as opposed to, well, in addition to or opposed to paper. One of the other comments in terms of opinions, yeah, I'd rather have the policy be fact-based. So if you can point out some opinions in here, or afterward meeting, I'll work on that to try to get them out, because we want it to be factual. Like I said, this was developed with the manager's office, myself, Travis, in conjunction with IT, and I'm not going to tell IT how to treat the computers, so.
No, and
I'm
I
going to go
was
with their
in tech
expertise.
myself. I
yeah.
wouldn't.
So that's basically what that is. I mean, a lot of it is, you know, I guess the softer stuff is manager's office, and the care and the use and the updates, that's IT technical expertise.
You're also right to one extent too, that we didn't bother to cost out what the opportunity cost savings are, which are substantial when you're talking about 3 hours out of a 40-hour work week. The person who's putting the packets together is the one who generates most of the savings in terms of opportunity cost. We gotta go through the same thing, and writing memos or doing background work, that's not gonna change. But getting the information out, excuse me, and it might even result in less last-minute paper coming your way, because we can push send on items that, you know, will be coming before you. Beyond that, in terms of dollars and cents, I don't know what more is going to be saved. Time to do other things, and paper costs. Maybe some wear and tear on the machine, but you know, I will miss the paper personally. I have comfort holding things like this. I don't have the same comfort with technology at a meeting. And I was probably nodding in the affirmative when the conversation came up historically, that there is a potential to be disrespectful or rude or give the appearance of being rude in a discussion. But you can have the same thing with paper. If you're talking to me and I'm writing down what you're saying, you don't know that I'm paying attention to you. You want me to look at you when you're talking, and then I can't write. So you still give the impression of perhaps being rude, even though you're really not. So I don't know how we fix that, with technology or without technology.
So with the use of these, would the intent be that the information on them would be scrolled on these screens so that everybody can follow?
You can certainly explore that, and that's one of the
'Cause I think that's how the
possibilities,
trustees do it,
yes.
right? Okay. All right. Curious. Yeah. Okay. I saw Mike, Andy, and then Sue. Sure. Mike.
Respectfully, I think staff has done their due diligence. I think we've seen what the savings are going to be. Is it going to take some getting used to? Of course, but I'm ready to move this forward. To be honest with you, I'm not really quite sure what else we can have staff do that's going to affect the decision.
Okay. Did I say Andy or Sue?
You said Andy next.
Andy.
Yeah, I'm a little discouraged that we went from using words like using my cell phone to look up pecuniary. Used to be discouraged. This is in the orderly conduct of business, where we have proposed changing or taking out the word discouraged, and so now it's forbidden. In this new policy, I've gone from being discouraged from using my phone to forbidden from using my phone. So I'm just feels like we took a step back rather than a step forward, because we in our orderly conduct of business started allowing me to look up pecuniary, but now I can't. It's
Just Sue next, Mike.
Yep.
So is there a specific
so
thing in the policy
I'm
you're asking?
Well, I guess the orderly conduct of business allows me to use the town-issued device, as does this other one. But if I get an emergency text message from my mother, I don't want to have to ignore it. When before it was discouraged, it wasn't a good practice, but now it's really should turn it
Greg,
off.
you have a comment on that?
Just getting into the technicalities of it, this is for the town-issued devices. So if you get a text message from your mother on your phone, this doesn't say you can't pick up your
Oh,
phone.
well, but the words it says are only town-issued computer devices shall be used by select board members during board meetings.
Oh, I see what you're saying, okay, yep.
Where the other policy says that these devices can be used for purposes related to the meeting. I guess it does say the same thing.
Yeah, no, we'll have to play with that. I mean, the language of that one was what Irene was mentioning earlier in terms of security issues and in terms of not bringing your own personal.
Yeah, you're right. I
laptop.
wouldn't
So,
use
yeah,
it, right.
we'll
I don't want
have
to, I don't want to read select board minutes on this thing anyway.
But no, that's
So you can work on that? Okay. Sue?
Thanks.
Two things. Maybe I missed it, but archiving of all of the information, how long will we have access to the digital version of?
I will need to check with IT on that.
Because not that I have a great process, but at home, I have things filed, and if I need to, I can go back and find something from. I mean, mine doesn't go back as long as most of yours, but I can go back and find something, and I also keep a folder of like unfinished business that's going to be at a coming meeting, right? So that I can find it quickly, and do we have that kind of search or whatever? How will we be able to find that stuff?
I think right now we're keeping that electronic copy that's available to the public for many months, right? We defined it, we talked about it one meeting a while ago. It's like,
Yeah, I'll have to check on the
6 months or
timeline, and
something.
if our
I think it was,
town website's different from the database that the select board will be using.
I think it was
so you
6
can-
months for the web page, and the manager's office always carried one full calendar year's worth of packet material.
Sue, did you have anything else?
Well, I don't, maybe it's moot, but, so we just had this, Public Works Committee, right, and during that meeting, I did bring my laptop in because we would reference materials and it was easy to have it. So I guess in the future, that would have been a no-no. But also, what if, like, somebody like Justin, who's not on either of the boards, but he's serving in the capacity of, being on a public committee, he doesn't have a town-issued device, what is does this not apply to him, or?
Yeah, this really applies to the select board tablets. We call them computer use because who knows what the future brings, but.
So it's okay for somebody that's not on one of the boards to bring in a private device?
It's just a select board, isn't it? Or is it planning commission?
No, this is just select board for now, and they're not gonna have access to your packets. They might get an individual item, but
Right.
they'll have access to the public packet that's online, but they're not gonna have the same select board packet that may have confidential materials, for instance.
Other comments, questions? Mike?
With all due respect to Andy, I disagree. I really don't think that we should have personal devices being able to go on to a personal device in addition to having the select board machine. And the reason for that is just because it leaves us open for getting either text messages or emails from people in the audience or people who are watching on Channel 17 or any of that stuff during a meeting, which I think is just, I just think that's horrible. We need to be able to work, the five of us, and do the work that we are charged with doing without getting interrupted or getting poked at, so to speak, from people outside the meeting, during a meeting. Afterwards, no holds barred. I mean, people get a hold of all of us at different times about different things. I go back to what Greg said earlier. If there's something that needs to be looked up, then I think Greg can do it and put it up on the screen for all of us to be able to use, rather than getting distracted with going and looking for it on our own. I love the idea of using the laptops. I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to save us money. It's going to make Travis's job easier. But I just think there has to be some limits.
Okay, Irene?
I find it really handy to use the calculator when we're in a budget session. I really don't want to have to be reading off long strings of numbers to Greg or anyone else in the room. I think it's pretty obvious that I'm using a calculator to anybody who's sitting near me, that I'm not getting secret messages from beyond. But again, not to mock what you're saying, I understand your concern, Mike, but I don't think that's ever been something I just hold the select board members to a higher standard than that, and I
Yeah.
would never expect anyone to do that, and if they did, that's a bigger issue that we have to address and can be called out, but I don't think that we should need to restrict each other's use of emergency cell phones or cell phones for calculator use.
Yeah, I think you're right. Using it for a calculator does seem pretty mundane. I'm just wondering how you draw that line, that's all. How do you draw that line?
Because we each have a conscience and we each hold each other to good standards, I think.
I'm open to discussing it further. It's fine.
I'm not saying I haven't seen people at this table do that. I have absolutely seen people at this table abuse their cell phones during a meeting. But I just think we're above that, and I'd like to continue to believe that and to police ourselves.
So what's the board's pleasure on the policy?
I still have comments if you want.
Okay.
I handed out 4 different articles because I went looking online because I was very curious. I know it's not popular to look at the science behind issues, but I thought I would look at the science behind the issues and see if indeed there were studies that have been done on how people read and absorb things on screens versus on paper. And the research seems to come together by saying that if you're looking at facts like what happened and when, that's very easily found as well as retained if you're screening. But if you are reading something in depth and it's abstract, it's a concept that you need to get a big picture view, paper is the way to go. And so, again, I'm dismayed that we're being sort of corralled into using a screen when I think setting policy is sort of the highest form of abstract thinking. I mean, you've got to be doing that 360, thinking about your constituents here, your constituents there, and being able to actually mark up the paper. Maybe you've heard those studies as well. Students who take notes in college on paper versus on screen are more successful because there's something about the act of actually writing something down that puts it in your brain and keeps it there longer and helps you think better. So again, I just see this huge missing piece in what we're being asked to approve today, and I understand how it could have slipped your minds. I'm not looking to lay blame. I just want to say there's many articles online to this effect, and I'm just disappointed that the science of this has not factored in at all, in addition to the actual cost of us learning or maybe being less efficient or less effective as select board members screening rather than reading a piece of paper.
Can I ask a question to the board? Is there anyone else, it sounds like Irene said, doesn't believe this is the right direction if I'm reading what you're saying?
I've said that to Doug all along, but now I have some data that actually backs it up. It's not just my opinion.
Is there
Or
anyone
past.
else that believes that's, to go into tablets is the wrong direction?
I'm planning to print anything that I want to look up more detail on anyway. So, and I'll hook it up to my own printer and I'll use my own paper, my own ink. And so you can
get the best of both.
I think, yeah. And, you know, if there's specific things I want to make comments on, cross out and write, I'll use, you know, I'll print. I think I could print it, hook it up to my network printer at home.
I believe so, and I can double check on that.
Because,
Yeah, we need to do that.
I think.
So it sounds like you're saying you're okay with it?
I'm okay with it, yeah. Absolutely, oh yeah, I'm fully in favor of getting tablets for this.
I'm just taking a poll here to see, because I want to know if we need to come back and visit this or not. Mike?
I'm for the laptop. I like Andy's idea of
The tablet.
if there's something of particular import, there's nothing to say that we can't print it off and bring it in. And to Irene's point, I would say that you can still take paper notes, whether you print something off or not. So I'm in favor of it. Like I said before, I think it's going to take some getting used to, but I like the idea.
Sue?
Just a question, we will have some way to edit the online docs, right? To insert notes or highlight things or?
Yeah, I'll double check on that one too, but I believe that it's the type of tablet where you'll get a stylus or finger touch screen or whatever you can mark up.
I mean, so that would be my only, I'm kind of ambivalent about it. I mean, I'll adapt, whatever. I use a screen for everything else in my life, so.
Having that feature would be nice, and I believe it does. I
Right.
think that-
And I have experience on other committees, especially at the regional level, where they only screen things now, and I find it to be much more difficult to read. Not just to make notes, but to read and absorb. So, and maybe that's just my handicap in this. But again, it looks like the research is behind my personal findings, and so for that reason, I'm disappointed that we would make this change so quickly without exploring all those avenues.
I'd like to weigh in. I mean, I believe this is the right direction to go with the tablets from an efficiency perspective, particularly for how the packets are put together. And yeah, my life is on the screen. I mean, doing paper is the unusual for me. Except when reading books. So, what's the board's pleasure?
Can I ask you to explain that comment?
Well, I like to read books.
Like as opposed to Kindle?
That's, I have a Kindle as well. I use them both, but
I like the smell of this. That doesn't count, right?
You can print whatever you want.
Right.
I don't think I should have to. I think I give enough time and energy to this work, and I think the least the town could do is supply packets for those of us who would like them.
We just have to
That's
increase
my
our
opinion.
stipend next year. Pay for paper.
So what's the board's
We
pleasure?
had a lot of
We're-
luck with that.
We're being requested to accept the computer policy. There was many updates done to it. What would the board like to see?
If accepting this policy as it's written here today is a gate for getting the training scheduled, then I would be in favor of moving forward with
I believe that is the case. Is
Accept
that
it.
correct?
Accept it with the modifications made tonight, and I'll take that back, make the changes, and start scheduling training.
And you'll do
I
it,
would,
Julie?
I would second that,
Okay.
if that motion was made.
Do we have, was that a motion?
We need the motion.
I move that the Select Board accept the Select Board computer use policy for adoption at a future meeting, and to allow staff to schedule a time for training, including the amendments made this evening.
You took notes on this?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Andy, do I have a second on that?
Second.
Thank you, Mike. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes 4-1. Thank you.
Do we still get the big budget book, or is that coming electronic?
That would be beautiful to not have.
You don't want the big budget book? Right?
Probably do. Probably do, yes.
Okay. We're
You
gonna-
cannot have it.
I'm going to try
No.
to keep this moving.
I'm sorry.
We're at business item 5J, the extra mile proclamation. Greg, could you take us through that? We've seen this many times now, right?
You have
At least
seen this
2 other
before.
times.
It's another year. It's another Extra Mile Day coming up on November 1st. And it's basically just a proclamation that the Town of Essex recognizes the citizens that go the extra mile in personal effort, volunteerism, and service, and really just kind of highlights the people who give back to the community and whether in Essex and beyond. And looking for for the select board to approve the proclamation again this year.
Okay. Comments, questions, motions? What's the board's pleasure?
What's the first mile? I'm serious.
I would have to get back to you on that one. And I would have to look into the
I would say
Extra Mile America, see if they have an answer.
I think it's a lot like,
business as usual.
I think it's a lot like having recreation departments used to motivate people for green up or community service and those things, and go that extra mile to volunteer and do things. That's an old recollection that we had from the very first time we had it. And I know that there was some discussion on that, but we are not an extra mile city in our practice, other than the adoption of the proclamation.
Amen to that.
Other comments, questions? If not, what's the board's pleasure on this one? Andy?
I move the select board approve a proclamation declaring November 1st, 2017 Extra Mile Day.
Thank you. Andy, do I have a second on that?
Second.
Thank you, Sue. Any further discussion on the Extra Mile Day proclamation being approved?
Just that I have it here to sign, I guess.
Oh, we usually read into the record.
Okay.
I think we can do that before we go to the vote.
You want me to read it?
Please, if you wish.
All right. Whereas the town of Essex is a community which acknowledges that a special vibrancy exists within the entire community when its individual citizens collectively go the extra mile in personal effort, volunteerism, and service, and whereas the town of Essex is a community which encourages its citizens to maximize their personal contribution to the community by giving of themselves wholeheartedly and with total effort, commitment, and conviction to their individual ambitions, family, friends, and community, and whereas the town of Essex is a community which chooses to shine a light on and celebrate individuals and organizations within its community who go the extra mile in order to make a difference and lift up fellow members of their community, and whereas the town of Essex acknowledges the mission of Extra Mile America to create 575 Extra Mile cities in America, and is proud to support Extra Mile Day on November 1st, 2017. Now therefore, the town of Essex Selectboard does hereby proclaim November 1st, 2017 to be Extra Mile Day. The Select Board urges each individual in the community to take time on this day to not only go the extra mile in his or her own life, but to also acknowledge all those who are inspirational in their efforts and commitment to make their organizations, families, community, country, or world a better place.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, all those in favor of the proclamation signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, that passes 5-0. Thank you all. Okay, then, we need to be able to table 5K, right? We talked about that, to October 16th. Is everybody okay with that?
Yep.
We don't have enough information. We need a motion to do?
Doesn't hurt, table it until future meeting.
Okay.
I expect the 16th, but future meeting.
I move that we table business item 5K, the tax stabilization agreement, to the next available select board meeting date.
Does that require us to do 16th?
It should be.
As long as it's understood that that available means it's available to be presented in its entirety, yes.
Okay. Great. Okay, thank you, Mike. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on tabling item 5K tax stabilization agreement? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, 5-0 on that one. Great. Next is 5L. It's results of the exit interview from Ben Gillum. I'd like to be able to do that in executive session to make sure that future, you know what's in this one. If there's any comments on public officials, that's the appropriate place to be discussing these. so I'll go over that in executive session. Then we have 5M, evaluation of municipal manager plan. Okay.
If I may, sir, yes, back in August, we talked about the idea of by giving you a recommended format for an evaluation for the future manager, and then you can use it to practice on me in getting ready for the next manager. You have a copy of that format, and we can do it this evening. I suggest it be in executive session, given that we'll be talking about evaluating a public official, me. And there might, and the fact that I'm going to be there also opens up the opportunity for having a two-way discussion on the effectiveness of board manager relations and what can be expected. I mean, you have an old dog here that's been around for a long, long time. You're going to have a brand new one. I think the expectations need to be discussed so that you don't unfairly hold the new person to the same expectations that you would of me, is my thinking.
I thought we were going to talk about the
format.
the actual format of this, as
Yeah,
opposed to
that's part of it
evaluating
as
you,
well.
per se.
Well, the August memo, I threw me in there, Max, I'm sorry. But
You threw you under the bus.
I threw myself under the bus, yes. And
Mr. Chair,
Mike?
my suggestion, if I may, would be, given the fact that it is now darn near 10:40 and we still have agenda items to go, to postpone this until the next available meeting. I think it's too important. I just think it's too important, and I don't want to, I for one don't want to be taking it up at 10:40.
There's no guarantee that on the 16th we'll be much earlier, but...
excuse me, sir.
Yes, Pat?
You know, I agree 100% with what Mike said, because at the hour, you tend to forget, I tend to forget what I'm saying sometimes late. If you don't mind having a reversal of executive session the next meeting so that we can do this, we'll have it at the beginning of the meeting. And then we would come down here and we'd just start our regular meeting later. And that way, everybody would be fresh. And then we could do it then, if you would not object.
I think that's a great idea.
Or okay with that?
Sure.
Okay, so then I guess since it's on the agenda, we need to have a motion to do that.
I think you have one.
Yeah.
I'll second it.
Yeah, before, sorry.
No? We have further
John?
comments?
I had further comments, yeah.
This now is good.
And I think you kind of touched on it. I was really challenged with why we were evaluating Pat at this point in time, given that you're retiring, and the intent of feedback is for the opportunity for improvement or to reinforce, good
Yes.
good actions, right, good behavior. So I think if the framework is really around assessing the tool and whether the tool is an effective, I think that's a valuable use of it. But I would feel that it's inappropriate at this point for us to actually,
I agree. I just,
And so do I.
And then the other thing was, if we were actually going to be doing a full-fledged evaluation of you, it would be very helpful to have previous evaluations to compare against, for what feedback was given, and has there been action, either reinforcement of a good action or opportunity. So I don't know, I know since I've been here, we haven't done one, so I don't know how far back a select board evaluation of the town manager occurred.
I can say there probably hasn't been one in 5 years, and the ones that were previous to that were all done by the board in executive session without me, and the only feedback I got would be negative, and I didn't get hardly any negative feedback that I can recall from any evaluation. So I wouldn't be able to give you much. What I was planning to show you in the executive session is what my original contract had in it for an evaluation. It was part of the contract, and I'm just going to pass that out and say that this is what it was, this is how it was done. I don't think it would be very useful for a newer manager, and I don't think it would be very useful if you followed the suggestion of maybe having goal setting and other kind of things done in advance of the first year, so that there would be expectations that are understandable by everybody, rather than, well, Sue has some expectations and Mike has some expectations and Irene has expectations, but, you know, for me, that could be maybe Irene's a hard grader, or maybe Sue's an easy grader, maybe Mike's in the middle, and the recipient gets a little dazed. So, I mean, that was gonna be part of it, and I was also gonna explain why I thought the system was good, and I was gonna throw a couple of things in about myself, evaluating myself, as I volunteered to do this for you and with you, and I think it's very valuable.
So that's why we need to be in executive session, because you want to use examples of
Of me,
yourself
yes.
as we're going over this,
Yes,
as opposed to
yes.
us doing a,
Yeah.
okay.
And as part of the discussion, the kind of schedule that we want to use with the new manager, like, you know, every 6 months or every year or whatever, you know, to actually do a formal feedback session.
Well, we'd have to decide what that should be.
Yeah.
So,
And again, that's, each board, as boards change, each board will have a different variation, but the fact that it could be done somewhat consistently, because goals and objectives don't get done in 1 year. They take a long time, because there's routine work and other things that just sort of show up. So quarterly reporting out of the goals and the objectives is kind of an open meeting part of that discussion as well. And again, I have some history in how that used to work as well, so I'd be very happy to begin.
So who moved and who seconded
Mike.
to move this to
Mike and
the
Mike.
next meeting? And we'll have executive session in the beginning?
In the beginning.
And it would still start at 7, right?
Oh, yeah, the
Have
meeting
to,
starts at the
right?
same time, it's just the
Yeah.
order of battle, if you will.
Okay.
So wait a minute, make sure you go said the same thing. Executive session starts at 7.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. The meeting, AKA executive session, will be the first item of business. Yeah.
Okay.
Is that a modification to your, I know you wanted to put it off, but did you actually mention executive session at the front load?
Yeah.
I don't think we actually had a motion, because I think I kind of.
I thought it was a good idea. I made an informal suggestion. I don't know that
Yeah.
Yeah, I
was
didn't really
a
hear a
formal,
motion.
a formal
No, I don't
I
motion.
should
think
get
we
a
had a
formal
motion.
motion for this, and I could.
I move that we do that we take
5M?
item 5M, evaluation of municipal manager, and move that to the next available select board meeting date to be scheduled at the beginning of the meeting, with our start time still to be 7 p.m.
Okay. Thank you. Mike, do I have a second on that?
Second.
Andy, you look confused. No? Okay. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor of moving 5M to the next available meeting with it in the beginning of the meeting with executive session, starting at 7, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. So we're going to move on to the next item then, which are the approval of minutes from September 11th, 2017. Do I have a motion?
I move approval of minutes of September 11th, 2017 with select board member corrections.
Thank you, Irene. Do I have a second on that?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Let's start on page 1. So,
On row 34, Ms. Cook updated the members that the Public Works Review Committee has created, the first draft not received. We had, at that point, created it.
anything else on 1? Go to page 2. Irene?
On line 74, we should be inserting lines from the end of the minutes, which are lines
Yep.
394 to 403.
Yep.
That's where the actual approval
Makes sense.
happened, was early in the meeting. We didn't go to executive session.
Okay, is that clear, Sam?
Yep.
Okay, good. Anything else on 2? Sue?
I didn't think it was clear that on the discussion about the brain dump here, I think what came out in the discussion is that Mr. Tyler drafted a brain dump response and Mr. Levy reviewed, but did not send his own. And I think that's important. That was part of the discussion, that the brain dump that was sent in was from Mr. Tyler, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I reviewed it.
Right.
What line is that?
I put it at 93. You know, there isn't, it comes after what, the end of 92. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on 2? Move on to 3. Maureen?
In the same vein as Sue's comment, you'll see my very colorful photocopy at my expense, not Travis's. I'd like to, first of all, move the beginning of line 109 into the middle of that paragraph. You'll see where the line goes, it's in purple. It's
Yep,
the
I got
brain
it.
dump thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're taking out the rest of that sentence, and we're adding the following, which is the red text at the top.
Yep.
Regarding Mr. Tyler's memo to MRI from his perspective and the lack of a separate memo from the select board chair, Ms. Renner, referred to lines 179 through 184 of the select board meeting, and then we go to 110, minutes, blah, 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 blah. And then at 111, we take out in red, according to the minutes, we take out Iris because her name's in the prior line. We take out the quotes because it's a close paraphrase, but it's not. We were condensing what she said in the minutes. And then finally on 115, we insert the red text that I scribbled at the bottom of that sheet. Ms. Renner asked that the board chairs take time to keep other members in the loop as monthly updates felt too sporadic. So I hope that's clear.
Anything else on 3?
Yes.
Actually, Sam, do you have?
Yep.
All right, I saw Sue's hand.
Just that the last line, it was clarified for Ms. Cook that the village would be getting the same request related to the census. I don't think that was me,
That
so
was
I'm
me.
guessing it was Irene.
It was me, yeah.
Okay.
And I was wrong.
What? Anything else on 3? Page 4? Sue?
Row 170, Ms. Cook asked how the town would address this issue if the property was not being maintained by the Koopas. That wasn't my question. It was how would it be enforced? Basically, in regards to the prior consultation and approval of the town tree warden, how would that be enforced? Okay.
Anything else on 4?
Yes.
More?
Sorry. The next paragraph talks about is confirmed that the license agreement would be in the land records and is cross-referenced for any title search. But I think also related to that, there was that the license agreement is null and void when the Koopas are no longer the owners, right? This doesn't apply. Starting at 174, where it says, Mr. Watts wondered if there would be any liability for the town if this parcel was sold, and I think that was a reasonable question, but the bottom line is that this license is only applies while the Koopas are the owners, and I don't see that here anywhere.
So, what change are you asking?
I am asking for, after 176, for there to be a line that says the license agreement becomes void when the Koopas are no longer the owners.
Is that true? I didn't think that was true. I thought it went with the land.
No,
It
it
only
doesn't.
applies
No.
to the Koopas.
It does apply.
Does not.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's important to include.
You got that, Sam?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Anything else, Sue, on 4?
No.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, 189, if it's okay, Sue, I'd like to take out the commented that she. You could just agree with Mr. Watts.
That's fine.
Okay, page 5. Page 6. Page 7, right?
6.
6.
Sorry. The end of 267, and Mrs. Renner noted Take out the rest, take out the because of the next line, other town committees, not towns.
Okay.
Using electronic devices. And then at 273, Mrs. Renner thought that the policy should reflect the practice and be sensible, rather than all that other stuff.
You got that, sir? Okay. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. And page 10. Okay. All those in favor of the select board minutes of September 11th, 2017 with corrections, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I'm going to abstain on this one, actually. I have that choice. Okay, we're going to move on to consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Approval of the consent agenda with select board member comments.
Thank you, Irene. Do I have a second on that?
Second.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, comments? Sue?
I have some, I guess, questions and comments. The, item 6C, the letter from the Burlington International Airport.
Okay.
Do I assume from that, Pat, that you are our current representative?
Well, yeah, sort of he who ducks last sort of thing. There was a report out from the contract employee on the status, and she called a meeting in my village office with Max and George and Deke. Deke was the contract employee, and they needed somebody at that moment to be the contact person. So both of my bosses looked at me and said, yeah, he is. But now that contact person has been elevated to a committee member, and I'm very uncomfortable being some kind of a committee member, and I think that that's your appointment. Boy, I'm really breathing heavy, so.
So why don't we follow our policy and have that
See, there's a
position
good idea.
advertised?
You're the man.
And then see who we get, and
Okay.
perhaps we can.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
That's a wonderful thing.
Okay. All right.
Just a couple more.
Sue.
Item 6G, this letter from Downs, Racklin, Martin,
Uh-huh.
about the Sandhill Solar.
Right.
Did the Energy Committee get a copy of this? Can they get a copy of it?
Do not know. I know the planning commission did. I will have to check on the energy committee.
Chances are no, but we'll make sure they do.
Okay, thank you. And then my last thing is 6J, this timeline for the municipal manager recruitment. Fourth box on the bottom from the left, the site focus group number 1. It says 10/16, and I thought we were talking about Saturday 10/14 for that first one.
You are, and we'll correct that.
Yeah.
Okay,
It is 10/14.
thank you.
Anything else?
Nope.
Other comments? Okay. Let's see. I had a couple. What item is? It's the one about the proposed budget timeline, and, what item is that?
Probably at the last one, you met the manager's meeting schedules and events. Was that
Yeah,
in there?
Yeah, I think
Or
that's.
is that
No, it's
5E?
E. It's
Oh,
6E.
It's called budget timeline?
6E.
Yeah.
6E, okay.
Never mind.
Okay,
Thank you, Greg.
On that, on the back page, it says due today is to obtain suggestions from select board on capital budget and plan articles and overall budget considerations. That's an important one. So I'm wondering if we should put that on our October 16th as an action item. So
If you
that
would like,
we
can
have
do that.
time to weigh in. For example, things like affordable housing, if that didn't happen this year, and the PC went for the energy one, right, because we had money for either or, I think it's probably wise to suggest we put in that. Anyway, so I wanted to make sure that everyone had the opportunity to really weigh in on that. It's an important one as we get into budget season. We okay with that? Can we make room for that? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, anything else? Hearing none?
I had
Oh,
one, I
what?
had one, but I lost it. Yeah. This warranty deed you gave us at the beginning, this is the RPDI
Yes.
done deal finally.
Settlement agreement has been finalized.
Wow. Very cool. We should celebrate that. Right?
How many acres?
Approximately 250.
Okay. And I know there's money coming in for a management plan, the rest stuff.
Beer for every 50 acres? Are you gonna buy us, Andy?
Okay, any other comments on consent? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor of the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, okay, motion passes 5-0. Now, as far as executive session, we did the interviews in open session. We tabled the tax stabilization agreement. We moved the evaluation of the municipal manager piece to the next meeting. The only one that's left then is the exit interview from Ben, and everybody got a copy of that. Do you see any need to go into executive session to discuss that further?
Unless there's something that's not.
I was gonna say, it seemed pretty favorable.
Okay. And something we could say in open meeting is that if there are any other questions you'd like to ask or reworded questions on that format, because I'd like to use the same
Right.
strategy or the same form.
Check.
I would be more than happy to hear your suggestions on that.
Thanks.
Okay?
Check.
All right, so then I would say we don't need executive session at this time. All right.
I
So
move
is there?
to adjourn.
Are we gonna actually have the discussion now? Is there any discussion to be had, or is it just, this is it?
That,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of straight, it's straightforward.
Okay.
Okay.
Can
Sue?
I mean, there was one thing in here that I thought we should be discussing, and that
Okay.
was.
Well, I'm happy to go into executive session if you'd like. I was just checking to see if you wanted to or not.
Okay,
can
so
do
we
that.
can't talk about it.
Well,
Use your discretion.
I guess in the future, executive or exit interviews could include, what do you call it, evaluation of public officials if they didn't like something. And I'd like to make sure that people feel at exit interviews open to letting us know what's on their mind without having it be broadcast if they're saying something bad about someone. So, but in this one, if it's not something
It's an
that's
opportunity for improvement, so.
Okay.
I mean, I guess.
So, what's the board's like to do on that one?
I thought we had just decided to have the discussion, but not in executive session, so that's where I'm confused.
Does it meet any of the executive session requirements of what you're gonna say?
I don't know. I mean, it's just, there's a reference here to something that could be improved, and I thought we should discuss that,
Yeah,
so that it
and
doesn't get lost.
My intent was to say that this is an executive session item, but if there's no need to discuss it further, then we wouldn't have it.
Oh, I thought
But
you meant,
what I'm
I thought you were
hearing-
proposing that we have the discussion in public.
No. Well, I didn't mean to imply that.
That's
So,
what I thought.
But if there's,
You're
is
right.
discussion, and Sue's saying she'd like it, I would propose we do go into executive session. So we can have just that open one and allow other volunteers that leave the knowledge that they can talk about any of us and have it be confidential amongst the board, okay? So, with that, which motions do we need to do to go into executive session?
Just this one. I have it here.
Okay?
So, I move that the select board enter into executive session to discuss the evaluation. Nope, that's not the right one. I had it.
Andy's got it.
Never mind.
Andy's
Okay, I move the select board into executive session to discuss the evaluation of a public officer in accordance with 1 VSA Section 313A3 and to include the town manager and deputy town manager.
Oh, so I did.
Okay.
Is that the right one?
I think that's the right one, isn't
Seemed like the right one.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Do I have a second on that one?
Second.
Okay, all those, any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
That was the one I was reading, but it didn't seem like the right one.
We need the second one then, too.